We've had a remarkable response we've had a remarkable response on the marketing initiatives, and we had well over 550 guys registering for the event. So we expect at least 300 people to participate. Out of the people participating, I see we've got candidates out of Thailand attending as well. I know we've got some guys out of India, and we have some participants out of the neighboring countries around South Africa. So it is going to be a fascinating event. We've got some of the panelists have international experience. The idea behind today's presentation is really about information sharing and being able to share practical information that you'd be able to apply in your business, that would assist you in building your business, taking your business to the next step, and making it more professional, and obviously being able to share some of your information and experiences with some of the participants today. For those of you that are not presenting and not part of a panel, we will activate microphones as and when required. So if you've got comment, or you would like to add some information, we will be able to activate your microphone. We have, I think, 2 or 3 people in the background that can manage different aspects of the webinar, so they would be able to elevate people as panelists. They would be able to activate microphones. They would be able to read and respond to questions and comments. So I'm hoping that the event will go well. We do have a 2-minute line drop policy. So if something goes wrong, how are we going to deal with it? This is what we are planning on doing. So if something goes wrong and I lose internet connectivity, or something goes wrong with my line for whatever reason, we will give the presenter 2 minutes to sort out his line, failing which we will move on to the next presenter, or we will change the topic. So I think we've just got to bear in mind that the event is being streamed from a number of different places. Most of the presenters are at their home base, or at their home offices, or at an office somewhere else. So it is very possible and very likely that something can happen with either the audio or the video, and in that event we will try and make rapid decisions to get the event to flow properly and to not have major hiccups on the presentation itself. I think that about covers my welcome. It is going to be an amazing event. If you can't join the full event, that's fine. We are recording it. You will be able to access it later on. I will introduce myself properly with the second session. I actually do have a slide. Just a second. I actually do have a slide available, which I think is that one. There we go. So our first speaker is Sham. We are here in the program at the moment. Our first speaker will be Sham. Sham is quickly going to give us an overview and a comparison between the telecom sector and the solar sector. The telecom sector at the moment, fascinating about the telecom sector. If you look at how they do installations, you get, they even give the technicians torque settings on how tight certain bolts should be made during installation. So the standards for the telecom sector at the moment is set very high. Sham has a good couple of years experience in the telecoms industry. He will introduce himself, he will cover that. And he's going to show us what the solar sector ideally needs to do in order to raise the bar as far as solar standards are concerned. Then I will give an overview of the residential and commercial sector. Guys, I'm not going to be looking at the rate at which it's growing. I'm going to be looking at what you need to do to make sure that your business stays alive. In other words, what is the sector looking like from a practical point of view? Residential and commercial, which type of candidates are we getting into the sector? How well are they trained? And what are the opportunities in the market? So that's what I'm going to do in that presentation. Then Sydney and Lebo has a landscape for new installers, which is going to be an excellent presentation. Sydney walked me through some of the things that they're going to be covering. What can you do to elevate your business? Which of those platforms are available free of charge? What can you do today? And what do you need to plan for in a month or two's time? So short-term and long-term planning, as well as what it's going to cost you to improve your business. Then 10 o'clock to 10:30 to 11, we've got women and their successes. I'm going to enjoy chairing that session with 4 ladies, Natalie, Lebo, Yolande, and Kirstie. All 4 of them from remarkably different sectors of the solar industry. One is a consultant, the other slightly more corporate based. Kirstie has an installer type company in the Pretoria Centurion region, and Yolande is involved in sales. So all of them, different frameworks, different backgrounds. I want to find out from them what are their successes, how do they find the industry. We've got another couple other ladies joining us today, so we want all of the participants joining us today to get value out of the presentation. Let me just minimize this thing. And then we'll have a short tea break, and then after the tea break, it's a 15-minute tea break, guys. It's really just a body break, grab a smoke, get a drink, for those of you who smoke, and those of you who drink tea. Get something to drink, and then we start off again. Get a bit of fresh air, take a walk around the building, and then we start up again. Jacques is going to take us through battery development and best practice for storage installations. Jacques is also from iGen. That's going to be interesting. And then we've got another section on growing the sector sustainably, risks for solar businesses there. I'm going to be chairing a session with Nick and Thomas from Rubicon and Aarden Solar. Let's just see. We want to take a look at what the challenges are that distributors are facing. If you've got R1 million in your bank account, should you be importing equipment? If you decide not to import equipment, what should you be looking out for? So a variety of things over there. I think the one thing that I was supposed to do was to pin my video. There you go. You should be able to see my video in the top right hand corner of the presentation. And then we are going to finish the session with financing renewables. Shaun from New Home is going to have a panel discussion with a couple of guys from Standard Bank, Nedbank, and Guy from an organization or financier called CANDI, and we are going to be exploring financing of solar systems, both from a corporate and a slightly more private. I don't know whether I can call CANDI, a private institution, but they're not as quite as corporate as, well, maybe corporate's not the right word, as I would see institutions such as Standard Bank and Nedbank. So financing from the formal and the informal sector. Guys, I've taken up 15 minutes of your time, which means I've taken up some of Sham's time. Sham, this is not going to impact your presentation at all. We will play around and manipulate the time slots a little bit as we go along. Sham, are you there?
All right, let me introduce myself firstly. Okay, let's just get into this. All right, can everybody see the screen?
Not at the moment. There we go.
All right. All right, so, okay, so everybody can see this. All right,
yes.
Let me introduce myself. Let me just move to the next slide and just introduce who I am. So I'm Sham Mudley. I'm the owner of a company called Shaks Solar Energy. We've been involved with solar and standby power systems for more than 25 years in the country. We've been strongly involved mainly with the telecom industry for companies like MTN, Vodacom, Ericsson. We've done a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa. We've done everything basically from a site acquisition right down to doing quality auditing, surveying for clients. We were involved with tier 1 standby power and battery companies, not just from products, companies such as Ericsson, Emerson, Vertiv, Siemens, C+T, Benning, and some of the other big battery companies in the world, Exide, Narada, Olicon, Fiam. We've worked very closely with them. So just to move on, I'm going to introduce slightly what the Association for Renewable Energy Practitioners is, AREP. So who is AREP? AREP is a behind-the-meter non-profit quality assurance organization that aims to promote the adoption of renewable energy throughout Africa by reducing stakeholder and end-user risk and unlocking finance into the sector. So basically, AREP is one of the few organizations that actually is pushing for quality standards within South Africa and Africa. It's a conduit for renewable energy trade, data, and installations, which is brilliant because most of the members that are within AREP, they get some form of marketing and promotion through AREP. It aims to keep the industry informed of market trends, latest technologies, and applicable standards, growth, and best practice. So basically, AREP actually is enabling our members to actually get on top of what's actually going on in the entire industry within solar in the world. Okay, so what would an ideal industry body be like? So this is a question that I think everybody should actually ask. What would it be when you're joining an industry? So we looked at it and we actually look at that. We'll handle public relations associated with the industry and the sector, promotion of education programs on the industry, lobbying for amendments and changes to regulations, holding networking and charitable events, having members actively engaged to improve standards, promotion of members both publicly and internally, right? When should we participate? When new legislation is involved, when standards are changed, when ongoing consultation for improvement to industry is required. What standards need to uphold and be reintroduced? Now, the last question that we've put in today, you can see we've actually asked reintroduce, and there's a reason for this. And I think Carel will probably run into it, or I'll run a little into it as well. Quality, conformance and consistency, technical expertise, process, methodology. All right, let me move on to the next slide to explain a little bit more on what we mean by the last question there. So in the solar and the telecom, the standards are more or less very close to one another. We use the SAN standard in telecoms as well as in solar. In solar standards, you're using the NRS regular standard, the SA grid code or SSEG code, the SSEG standards, which follows under IEC 60634, ISO standards, and then the telecommunication standards, we're using the SANS 10142, previously SABS 0142, the LSEC, which is the Swedish standards, which Ericsson mainly used, ETSI standards for ICT, Ericsson standards, the Siemens KKS Handbook of Quality, Safety Standards, and also ISO 9000, 14000, and 18000. Now, one of the issues where we actually find in the solar industry, and I'm sure many others have also encountered this, you find solar panels catching on fire, houses catching on fire, buildings catching on fire. And what we find is that where the problem is coming in, the solar systems are not even engineered properly. It seems to become a norm in South Africa specifically, where it's a one size fits all, which is not correct, right? Standards are not being followed according to SAN standards. OEM standards and recommendations, specifications are not even followed. Then what happens is you find installers using inferior products to reduce cost. And they configure these products into the solar system, and you find like connectors, for instance, MC4 connectors that are not, it's pirated connectors, which actually tend to actually cause arcing. Then they use there's no use of engineers. Let's put it that way. There's no use of any engineers to actually even design a solution. So they just go out there, the guy figures out, okay, listen here, system can work. We have a small load and we can actually install the system. And that's when the problems start happening. And then you get the bigger systems where no quality standards are actually being followed. No, there's no companies that are involved in doing a lot of the bigger installations in the more commercial business. They don't have ISO quality systems in place. And that becomes another problem. There's no process management behind that. Then lastly, they have a whole lot of unqualified technicians installing solar. Many companies just find electricians, guys that are actually just an electrical technician to actually help them and assist them and start installing solar systems, which actually causes another big major problem. Okay, so why did the telco systems fail in the past? Now, initially, even with the companies like MTN, in MTN, in the beginning, in 1994, when they started off in the country, there were a lot of problems with the network, which many people don't know from the outside, because when a lot of the installations were done with DC power to back up the switch equipment of MTN, these were never engineered properly for a lot of reasons. The guys never understood how to engineer or how to differentiate between AC and DC systems. So the telecom systems were not engineered properly according to SAN systems or SAN standards. And then on top of that, many of the guys doing the installations or working on these systems were electricians, which were used to AC principles, and DC power wasn't spoken about much. And if you look at the picture that I've actually put out there, that is actually an actual picture of a site that I went to go do an audit, a safety audit and inspection on, of a fire with freely ventilated batteries, which exploded because of the hydrogen, and there was a spark that actually caused that. So the problem with that, there was no engineering that was actually done behind that, and that was actually the cause of that fire that actually broke out. So with no ISO standards, no engineering in that, and no standards followed, this is why the telco networks, if you find nowadays, they've actually pushed very hard that companies that do business with them have to be ISO registered and have an ISO number to actually work within their framework, just to protect themselves from problems like this occurring. So what are we looking at on how to improve the standards? So basically, if you have a look at the picture that I've put in here on the right here, we have a Huawei product, and basically it tells you all the specifications of the product and how you should actually install it. It gives you all the threshold levels of the inverter to be used and how it actually should be connected. There is a full documentation on how to actually install the inverter. And below that, you'll see that is actually a discharge characteristic curve of a battery. So I don't think, look, I've spoken to many people. A lot of people don't even know what that curve looks like. They just assume that, okay, you install a battery, it's going to work, it's going to back up your system. So engineering is the most important thing with any of these site installations, determining, having a proper site survey done and an energy audit to determine whether the site requires, what sort of power the site requires. The design must meet the limitations of the equipment manufacturers to ensure proper and safe operation. And the engineering must meet the SANS and NRS, but also ISO standards. I'm sure I'm not going to go into detail, but the engineering should meet also other standards in the country, and also your engineers should be XR registered and PR engineers, right? Correctly engineered systems should provide proper SLDs, equipment allocation drawings, all of those things to comply with the local grid. All installed equipment should be labeled, right? May seem meaningless. Some people don't even do this here, but the labeling is critical to actually ensure safety from both the user and the operator of the equipment. The system must be tested and configured to the site design and the limitations of the equipment manufacturer. Personal protective safety equipment must be complied to at all levels. Now, one of the things that I found, you find many people doing installations on sites, whether it's commercial or residential, they don't have any safety equipment they're working with. Now, there is no regulation or anything as such to impose that you have to wear it. But from a safety point, I don't think anybody should actually be working out on any site without having the proper PPE equipment. Specifically, because of the solar industry, we work with energized equipment, which is the most dangerous part and which can actually cause a lot of fire hazards and also injury to personnel. The next thing is that a lot of these installers that we find out in the market installing, they don't have any proper fall arrest training, and they don't know how to use the equipment. They don't have any lifelines. They don't have the fall arrest harnesses. So that is also a big problem, because once somebody falls off a roof, and then you're going to have an issue with the person dying, etc. There is no proper working at heights. The installers don't understand the dangers of arcing and arc flashovers, especially when they connect up the DC part of solar panels, because with the solar panels, you have high voltage and you have a very high risk of arcing and arc flashovers. The other thing is that people that are operating this equipment are not trained. So you find that you're not having skilled personnel working on equipment, besides installing, they don't know how the equipment works properly. So what are we saying from an electrical safety point? How do we prevent injury? How do we prevent a lot of these injuries and hazards and fires happening? We need to make sure that there's proper trained personnel, and these proper trained personnel must be able to do proper fault finding, proper maintenance, working with the correct tools. Carel mentioned earlier about talking. With telecoms, when we worked with batteries or anything to do with the telecoms, there is no way that they'll allow you to work on the sites without insulated, 1000-volt insulated equipment. Now, it's taken a new step forward, especially now. I find that a lot of the garages in South Africa, the Shells, the BPs, and that are actually moving over to solar, there's different standards and also different tooling that you need to have when working on those sites. Another key factor which we found that where it's actually a big problem on a lot of sites, the people installing don't understand how to do proper bonding and earthing of the systems, which causes, there's two issues there. The first issue, you get floating earths. The other issue is that where you get injuries to personnel or people getting electrocuted. So the next part is also the using correct switchgear and how to coordinate those circuit breakers. Many people install circuit breakers without understanding that there's a specific methodology behind installing the circuit breaker and how the circuit breakers are coordinated during short circuit. There's no lockout and tag out systems for any installation when people are working. So nobody else knows that there is an installation taking place, especially in big commercial properties where you should be actually locking out and tagging out systems, breakers and things like that to prevent people from switching on. Qualified personnel on site, once again, find that there's not enough qualified people that should be on site and they don't inform. That's another big problem where the plant managers, especially where you are working on smaller commercial buildings, there's no plant manager being informed that there is work happening. Some of the guys are just going out onto site and they're just working as such. So what we say is that this is just a brief outline, what we're talking about during a process of installation. There should be some process of project management behind the whole installation and how it should actually flow. So if you have a look onto the right, you'll see we're talking about a project manager, somebody that runs the entire project that actually has control over what's going on. A step-by-step quality process needs to be followed. We need to make sure that there is quality from step 1 right to step 10. Ensuring that compliance to regulations and standards are followed in a methodical manner. Now, that is a big problem that many don't seem to, it's ignored. I'm not sure why people do that, but we find that many people that do installations just seem to ignore it and think, okay, look, you know what, we can install, we don't need to worry about certain regulations. You'll find that a lot of residential houses are being installed, they have solar installed, and they're not registered at the councils, at the municipalities, which I think is a big problem from insurance, from also feeding into grid, because there's some inverters that actually feed back into the grid and which many people don't know that. So with proper engineering of the systems, we must ensure that there's basically single line drawings of the design, block diagrams of how the equipment should be connected, interconnected as part of the solution design, cable running, marking and labeling lists, compliance to the SANS and IEC standards, proper final testing and commissioning of systems, site documentation, and handover certificates that everything has been complied to, followed, standards have been followed, and that the equipment is working correctly. Training is another big form that we should actually focus on, that any individual working with any form of power should be trained and retrained on a yearly basis to ensure that they fully understand what's happening, the working principles and standards of engineers. Engineers designing the solutions should be trained continuously on the newer products being introduced and what the limitations are. All personnel working with any energized system needs to ensure that they have taken first aid training, which includes CPR training. You find many companies that are seriously involved in the solar industry have taken these steps forward with their staff, and they focus on continuous improvement of training with their staff. So again, we're talking about continuous improvement. So the key to improving the standards within the solar industry is to push forward continuously to ensure improvements to the standards and the monitoring and quality of installation through specific and routine checks and audits. I know we have today on the panel some people from insurance and some people from the banks and that. And I think it's also where the banks and the insurance companies should get more involved to actually understand what needs to be done when a system is actually installed at a residence, and how they ensure that it shouldn't just be only an electrician COC that's actually stating that the system is working, everything complies. There should actually be a doc pack that's actually handed over to the insurance company, banks, to actually say, look, these are the standards that have been followed, these are all the tests that have been done, and this is how that this system complies to standards and regulations within the country. All right, I think that's my last slide. And any questions from the audience here? And
thanks, Sham. There was someone who noted that the text was a little small, and I didn't really want to interrupt your flow of the conversation. I think what I've realized is that we do have a number of guys that are actually attending and watching the webinar on their cell phones. So if we do the presentations, I think we might have to, but that's just on a side note. I do have a question for you on your presentation itself, which is interesting. We often talk about engineering. But I think there are people out there who don't know when you talk about an engineered system, what do you actually mean? Is you mentioned a word of, I think the word you used was cascading of circuit breakers. Or was
Thanks,
it
Carel.
wasn't cascading. What was the word you used?
Look, it's actually, you can use both the words, cascading or coordination. It depends.
Coordination, that's it. So what is coordination? Just explain in 2 minutes what coordination is of circuit breakers, because I think a lot of us look at engineers and we go, yeah, okay, so what's the purpose of an engineer really? Do they add value?
So, Carel, thanks for asking that question. That's something I've actually been researching as well, quite intensely over the past few months as well, looking at the coordination on the circuit breakers. One of the big problems is that when people install, let's say an MLV, and you have a panel filled with your circuit breakers, you normally have an air breaker, a large air breaker that's actually installed in there, and then you have multiple breakers to feed loads and equipment, and then your upstream loads and whatever. Now, what actually happens, what the coordination is because on a circuit breaker, you can set your short circuit trip current and the time on the circuit breaker. What tends to happen is that nobody looks at that. And this is when there's a big role in that aspect, is that when you install the circuit breaker, if there's some short that occurs on your upstream feed, that shouldn't trip your main downstream feeding breaker. It should only be isolated to that upstream feed. Now, what you find is that if there's when it's not done properly, you'll find that if there's a short circuit on that upstream feed, it can trip the entire system and switch off everything. Now, there's been cases, I've seen cases like that where the circuit breakers are not coordinated. And what that actually just means is actually basically what the word coordination means. If an upstream breaker trips, it's got to trip the breaker that's directly feeding it and not the main breaker that feeds the entire plant. Now, where you find that when this is not done correctly, because the trip levels and the short circuit currents are not set properly, it actually trips everything all the way down to downstream. That's now when you have to get in somebody to actually come and switch on the system, because you're not sure whether the short actually came from the municipality, the main feed, or it happened internally.
Yes. Okay, that's interesting, and that's just an example of engineering, but that's a very small portion of the engineering that would go into the entire site. So the other ideas or other examples of engineering would be sizing the cable correctly. This was sizing the circuit breakers. So it's ensuring that all the components match the installation. That's really what the proper engineering would entail.
Also, just another point, sorry, Carel, that you mentioned the breakers, especially now that we on with the batteries on this we're moving more into batteries and storage. A lot of people don't understand that it's just not a matter of connecting up the cables to a battery. A small installation, a residential, fine, you may get away with it. It's not a major thing. But when you start installing, when you start talking kilowatts and megawatt of battery, you need to understand clearly exactly what your volt drops are within the cable and how to size cables, bus bars, and basically that whole set of product and components that fit in together to actually ensure that when the system is working properly, you don't have unnecessary trips, or with short circuit, you don't have things burning out.
Yes, that's excellent feedback. Thanks, Sham. I see we do have one or two questions. One of them has come in from Willem. Willem says, what about structural and fire COC from the civil engineers per SANS? And I do agree that there are other documents that Sham may not have covered specifically, but I think Sham has half an hour, and there's only so much you can share in that time. So Willem has a good point about the structural and fire COC from civil engineers per SANS 10400. There was a question from Olin, and he says, Sham, you mentioned the need for continuous training. Can you give an idea of time requirements and indicative costs of such training? I don't know if you want to answer that or whether I should answer that one.
I think you can answer that, Carel. That's more up your line.
Okay, let me just quickly look at the other questions. Alvin says, or it might be Alvin, says, never seen panels in flames. And then Alvin wants to know what causes that. I don't know if you want to spend a minute to quickly answer that one.
Yeah, I can, Carel. There's actually two things that I just want to, if everyone can just see here. If you look here, I'm actually just focusing just quickly on this here on arc flash. That's one of the biggest causes of panels catching on fire, but there are other factors. Now, I just want to touch quickly on something just before everything else. And that is one of the things I'm not sure from engineering, just to jump back onto engineering here. Many people that install solar systems, especially on the residential, I find this a lot on residential, do not have any understanding on what the temperature compensation factors are on panels to start off with firstly. I've had somebody ask me a question now about a week ago. They installed a system out here in Gauteng, and it got quite cold for 1 or 2 days here, but not seriously cold like Cape Town and that, but it got quite cold. But when they installed the panels, they were surprised. They couldn't understand why the voltage jumped on the panels, or feeding into the inverter. It jumped from something like 400 volts to almost 600 volts, and the inverter exploded. Now, they couldn't understand what happened because they thought they did everything correctly. And it was only after I made them realize that they never took into consideration any factors behind the solar panel temperature compensation. And once you start looking into that detail there, then you start understanding your DC to AC ratios, your AC to DC ratios and things like that. But that's where the engineers come in, because many of these installers that are doing it don't understand that. The next thing that actually causes the solar arcing is actually using inferior connectors. Now, when I talk about inferior connectors, you'll find a lot of solar panels. If you look at the connector, it's a Storage connector. Now, what happens is there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of connectors there. You should always match the connector that's on the panel with the connector that you're using to feed downwards into your inverter system. Now, those are the two main things that actually cause the big problems with the solar arcing or arcing on panels, and which actually then tends to cause a fire. The other thing is, which people don't talk about, is actually also, which is, it seems very minimalistic, but it's also shading. Shading can cause a huge problem when you actually have your panels. And this is where you find, if you do some research, a lot of companies, the bigger companies like Huawei and Solar Edge, they sell the Solar Edge optimizers to prevent that, because you have different voltage levels when you don't have optimizers and you have shading. So yeah, those are just a few of the factors that actually cause or can cause a solar panel to catch on fire.
Thanks, Sham. I think the one of the biggest that I would agree would probably be terminations or connections that are not done properly. They then heat up and cause arcing, and eventually that turns into an electrical fire. Yeah. Sham, you're just about through your time. Can I quickly run through these other questions? We had an anonymous attendee saying, do you have a document pack for the PRNs that you recommend for testing and commissioning? I think as far as the document pack is concerned, it depends on your field of expertise. So you would have an electrical engineer that would have a different type of document. And I think it really depends on the point of view that you're asking this from. If you are asking this as a consultant that provides a diverse range of services, in other words, you create the document pack for the customer, you create a tender document, and you make sure that all the other documents are in place. That's a completely different conversation, and maybe the doc pack for PRNs is not descriptive of exactly what it is that you're looking for. So for a quick answer, I would like to say that I think the purpose of an industry body is for guys such as yourselves to form steering committees within an association that would be able to create those documents for the benefit of the industry. Yes, Linda.
We do have a hand from Kevin Payne.
Okay, I'm going to mark that one as having been. Oh, Kevin wrote Kevin wrote a letter as a question. Are you going to activate Kevin's microphone?
I am, and then Nkosi Sibia also has raised a hand.
Okay, guys, we are going to, I'm going to give Kevin 30 seconds to quickly ask his question, and then we are going to have to proceed. I see, Kevin, just before you jump in, I see Lindsay have mentioned that I've bought from various sources those MC4 connectors, and they all look the same. They all look the same, but guys, those connectors have all been manufactured to different tolerances because each connector has a different patent. So you've got to make sure that if they look the same, have a look at finer detail like the color of the O-ring, the connectors. Yeah, it is a real world practical problem, Lindsay, I agree. And unfortunately, it is something that you've got to pay a bit more attention to. Kevin.
All right, thank you can you hear me?
Yes,
I can hear you. All right, thank you to the gentleman for the presentation. Just to go quickly, obviously I think that there is a strong feeling towards lifting up standards and regulation. I just wanted to try and balance that because certain comments there were made about the municipalities and registering systems, and particularly on light commercial and domestic systems, where there is really an unworkable situation developing where if the COC is finally going to be signed off with the approval from the municipality, but you now put the sales cycle completely in the hands of government bureaucrats who don't have any particular desire to do anything very quickly. And that is a big problem, and it's one of the things that's really going to hamper growth, and it leads to renegade systems. One of the reasons people are not registering the systems is because of the unbelievably unwelcoming and unfriendly and untimely manner in which these registrations have to happen. They don't relate to the commercial real world at all. And so an unworkable situation is developing. And one of the things that I'm really pointing out is that the industry really needs to band together and say, listen here, guys. I'll give you an example. One of my simple qualifications there on the work at height. To have a license for a work at height level 1, you need to renew that license every 3 years, gents. You do. Okay. So in solar, and I made this point to electricians before, you can bring in an electrician from the 1970s. Don't tell me circuit breakers have changed. Don't tell me DBs have changed. No, they haven't. I can work 50 years between the two industries. That is not true in solar. Solar needs constant education. I don't agree with the gentleman that every year is practical, but I do think something like every 3 years. You're the company, you have the registered guys, etc. You do the paperwork, and you do the paperwork in-house, and you land up at the municipality's desk, and you say, municipality, I'm the qualified person. Here is the packet. It's my responsibility to register it. I've done all the work. But you cannot control the speed at which this market develops. Start taxing the roads, municipalities, start finding innovative ways to tax your citizens in a useful way, and stop having this war against the installations, because it is leading to a very bad attitude in the market. I used to work as an installation director for a company. I'm now on a sabbatical doing all of this stuff so I can do, but I can say to the gentleman, the client out there who's spending 350,000 Rand on a good quality domestic system has no interest in dealing with his municipality, because the municipalities have not treated them like citizens and are so appalling at trying to offer service. And that is a real problem. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. I can hear you're quite passionate about a number of things. So let me quickly answer a few things. You've got to understand, and I'm not stepping in on behalf of Eskom, and I'm not stepping in on behalf of any political, I don't have any political agendas. We have 277 different municipalities, of which 177 are registered to resell electricity. So it's not just a case of walking up to a municipality and having your system registered. A lot of those, approximately 30 of them, are registered and do have policies in place for feed-in tariffs for solar systems. So if you happen to be in a municipality where they don't have those feed-in tariffs, the guys simply don't know how to deal with those applications. That, unfortunately, is just a part of where the industry is at the moment. There are organizations supporting the municipalities in getting the policies and the documents in place. So we are getting there. It is a slow road to take, but we will get there eventually. We do have more municipalities now that are registered and do have policies in place than what we had 3 years ago, but it's a slow process and it's getting there. I think what's important is to be able to, and I sense your frustration, but not necessarily get frustrated, but keep your side of the project clean. In other words, if you do an installation in a municipal area where you do not have a municipal policy, make sure the customer's paperwork is in place. Make sure he has the COC. Make sure he has all the engineering certificates. Make sure that all the line diagrams and the paperwork is there to ease the process once that municipal region comes to the point where they can process those applications. Yeah, so I sense your frustration, and that is, yeah, unfortunately, that is just where we are as far as industry is concerned. Sham, I'm going to have to end your session though.
Carel?
Yes, Linda.
Sorry, can we just take Nkosi Sibia's question quickly? He did have his hand up for a while. And then perhaps even if we can get back to Nkosi after the presentation, but if you could possibly just pose the question and then we can move on.
Nkosi, are you there? You have 30 seconds and your time starts now.
Yes, I'm there. Good morning.
Okay.
Yes. I've looked after 9. I've looked late after 9. My problem is that I can write them a question, but the send icon is not there in my site. I don't know why.
Okay, that's fine. Nkosi, what's the question? Go.
Okay. Is it possible to get this presentation and so that I can print it?
Yes, absolutely. You are going to get the presentation. You guys are going to be getting certificates. Those of you that are registered with the Engineering Council, if you are interested in having CPD, this presentation has been registered with the Engineering Council for CPD points. So there will be a certificate that we will be able to issue. However, for guys who are not registered with the Engineering Council, there's no real point in getting a certificate because there's nothing really that you can do with it. Olin says questions that were raised and not answered, will they be responded to somehow? Now, I suspect, Olin, that you asked a question and that somehow it wasn't answered. Sorry, I assumed that response answered the question. Where's the Q&A? Where is Olin? Olin had a question. What was it? Sham, you mentioned for continuous training. Okay, so Olin, to quickly answer your question, there are lots of different training platforms that you can make use of. You can do an informal training session. That is something like PQRS offers. That's a 2-day session or a 3-day session. Those sessions are really just to give you the information you need to understand how the technology works. It's not going to give you a formal qualification. If you need a formal qualification, I would suggest that you join one or two. There are online platforms where you can get an N2, N3, and N4 in electrical engineering. And then you would be able to use those qualifications to register as a qualified electrician. Those platforms, as far as cost is concerned, so you can get an N2. I think it's about R1,000 per subject, and you need 4 subjects. So it's about R4,000 for every 3 months. So it's roughly R1,500 a month that it's going to cost you, and it will take you about a year and a half or 2 years to get up to an N4 level. And I really hope that answers your question. So you've got to, guys, when you look at education, you've got to start at the end point. You've got to say, what do I want to become? And then you've got to go back and say, okay, how do I get there? And based on where you are going, you need to say, okay, if I want to have a formal qualification, this is the route I need to take. Okay, guys, my presentation is the next one up. I want to quickly talk about an overview of the residential and commercial solar sector. So because the guys asked to make the screen larger, I'm going to do it that way. Then you can see what is being presented. Some of the questions that have not been answered, we will get to them. Hopefully a little bit later during the course of the morning or somewhere in between a session. Okay, so first of all, who am I? I'm going to run through this one quickly. There we go. Imported my first solar panel in the year 2000. I'm qualified in a number of trades. I'm going to really run through this because we are running a bit behind schedule. My main work in industry is training and development for the energy sector. I'm the owner of PQRS and partner in an EPC called the Energy Gurus. I am the former ombudsman under the Eskom Solar Water Heating Rebate Program, and I started out as part of the Bucky Brigade in the 1990s. So I've really gone full circle from being picking up guys at intersections to assist in doing projects through to looking at how industry bodies work and trying to understand how the sector operates. So I understand the industry very well, and I believe that I would be able to provide a good guidance as far as training and development is concerned. Okay, introduction to PQRS. PQRS is the largest training provider in South Africa. We trained about 200, in 2019 we trained just under 1,000 guys, and in 2020 it was still just under 1,000 guys under lockdown. We've got a number of online courses which basically focus on sales, storage and installation. We have a number of people backstage. It's always the people backstage that makes the operation run seamlessly. Linda, you've heard Linda's voice throughout the presentation. Linda is responsible for the administration, course administration, and Eugene takes care of some of the course presentations. And then we have Barbara, Jocelyn, Amelia, and Corbin involved in one way or the other within the organization. What we've got on this slide is interesting. Just before lockdown, we used to do a lot of face-to-face presentations. Those face-to-face presentations have all moved online. But what I would do before I start the presentation is I would quickly gauge the audience. And this slide gives us an indication of what the audience looked like. Now, there are some guys that are working off their cell phones, so I have summarized the slide on the next, summarized the survey on the next slide. So out of the 31 guys that attended that one training session, 14 of them were entrepreneurs. So we asked a number of questions. Let me just see, I can't highlight, no. Sorry, I can't highlight it that way. Let's see if I'm going to try this again. So this is where I am at the moment. So 14 of those were entrepreneurs. We had 5 electricians, 3 technicians, 2 engineers, a farmer, a salesman, a builder, a software developer, and a mine captain. 3 had previous solar experience, 7 had almost had experience, and 21 had no clue. So what do you need to have to almost have experience? So if you've worked with a battery, or you've done you've taken a 12-volt DC supply to a charge controller and maybe all the way through to a panel, that would qualify you for almost having experience. 21 out of the 31 guys who attended the training had absolutely no clue. Only 10 had adequate electrical knowledge, 15 had little electrical knowledge, and 6 had no electrical knowledge at all. Out of this slide, we are saying that we've got a lot of guys flooding the market that have absolutely no idea of what's going on in the industry. And if we look at why these guys are flooding the market, we will see that a lot of this has to do with the fact that there are a lot of guys that are losing jobs because of the impact of COVID. There are lots of guys that are losing work as a result of the fact that there's power security. So we've had this perfect storm where a lot of people have lost their source of income, and the only rapidly growing market at the moment is the solar PV sector. So we've got this extremely diverse group of people moving into the solar sector, anywhere from printer salesman and car salesman. We saw in the previous slide a mine captain, and they have no idea what the market is like or what the technology is like. Because you are forced into this position, you get involved in selling systems that you don't really know how they work, and installing systems when you don't understand the technology. So let's quickly look at economic viability. Why is the market growing? The market is growing because the consumers are under economic pressure to reduce costs. So we've got two of those terms that Sham used that everybody might not understand. One is grid parity and the other one is levelized cost of energy. And maybe before I discuss grid parity and levelized cost of energy, I should maybe just explain what they are. And I think I've got a slide. On this slide, we look at grid parity. Now, we've got a lot of information on this slide. And what we are really saying is, if we follow the red line, I don't know if you can see my cursor. If we follow the red line, you'll see that the red line represents the Eskom tariffs. The blue line represents inflation. So we can see in 2007, 2008, we saw when we started having the electricity crisis, we saw a massive increase in electricity prices, because that's when Eskom realized that actually their prices are way below international norms and standards. So they started increasing their cost. And what this means is, in the same way that Eskom has a price for the products that they sell, or the energy that they sell, a solar system has a cost of energy. A lot of us have this perception that solar is free energy, but solar is never free energy or free power. There's always a cost associated. If it's not to maintenance, it might be to insurance. If it's not insurance, there would be a cost to owning something. It's got to be cleaned. It's got to be looked after. And the minute you take someone, even if it's a guy that works in your office, and you ask him to clean a solar panel, there's a cost associated to it. If we take and this brings us through to the cost of energy. If we look at the cost of a solar system and we divide that by the lifetime energy production, or the energy production of a solar plant, that gives us the levelized cost of energy. The levelized cost of energy of a solar system at the moment is between 50 cents to R1.10 per kilowatt hour. So what does that mean? If we look at the Eskom pricing, we'll see that over here, there is a point where solar systems becomes cheaper than the Eskom supply. And that point right there is the point where it starts becoming viable. Sorry. That point right there is the point where it starts becoming viable to fit solar. Now, in 2015, towards the end of 2014, we started seeing some regions reaching grid parity. In other words, the levelized cost of energy was cheaper in certain regions. Grid parity is just a fancy word for parity means being equal. So grid parity means the cost of Eskom is equal to the cost of a solar system. And if we look at 2019, we see that we reached grid parity, and maybe I shouldn't say grid equality. No, that's a bit, might come across as being gender-based, but we reached equality in grid and solar costs in 2019 when we looked at storage devices. So a battery-based solar system started becoming cheaper in certain municipalities around 2019. So what this does, this has a massive increase, because all of a sudden, at every braai, or for those of you that are based overseas, at every barbecue or at every meal, every family meal, and whenever you have friends over, everybody's talking about solar. And because everybody's talking about solar, you have a lot more people migrating to the technology in order to offer solutions. So grid parity we've covered. We've seen the cost of solar coming down, and we've seen the cost of Eskom going up. So it's cheaper owning a solar system than what it is to get power or energy from Eskom. Then a levelized cost of energy, we've seen those costs coming down. Financing, we have loads of financing options. Shaun is going to be taking us through the financing presentation towards the end of this webinar. And then as far as power security is concerned, load shedding is a major issue. And load shedding, if I have a business and all of a sudden I lose power, I'm going to do what I can to have some sort of power security. So that's going to move people to find solutions, and that we've had this perfect storm driving people into the solar sector. Job security I've already mentioned, so I'm quickly skipping over to the next one. Grid parity we've covered. LCOE we've discussed. I don't know whether there are any questions. There might be questions on it. We've got an extremely volatile market environment. I have never been involved in a market that is as volatile as the solar industry is. And I've been involved in a number of industries, but Nick and Thomas will cover distribution and imports, and they'll talk about the market volatility from a distribution and an imports point of view. What I would like to look at is the business owner. What is happening to guys that are starting up businesses? And the first point that I'd like to mention is the Eskom switch. I call it the Eskom switch, and it was really just something I thought of last night, because Eskom switches on load shedding, and then when they switch on the load shedding, the solar market flies. When Eskom switches off load shedding, in other words, when there's no more load shedding, the solar industry effectively stops, especially at the moment, the residential market. We have seen the residential market, what's the word one of my friends used? Tank. The residential solar market has tanked because Eskom flipped the switch, and at the moment we don't have load shedding. So because we don't have load shedding, guys don't have a need to have solar systems. Where we do still see a bit of activities in the commercial and industrial sectors because of the LCOEs now being lower than the cost of energy of what the factory and commercial business owners are paying for energy. So it's starting to make economic and financial sense to own a solar system. So when I talk about new business owners not understanding the market environment, I'm talking about guys moving into the solar sector. They don't understand the market environment, so they come in with pricing that's incorrect. They don't know how to price the systems, they don't know how to sell the systems, they don't know how to market the system, so that creates an extremely difficult market environment, which would add to the frustration. I'm saying this with a kind of a smile. I'm saying this with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek. That would add to the frustration of guys that are in the market at the moment and guys that have been in the market for a long time. So in order to hedge your business, the only way to do that is to diversify your business. So don't think that you are going to close your business, close one business, start up a new business, and you're going to have this amazing business in the solar sector. You have to diversify your products and services to compensate for what I call the Eskom switch. I don't know how I am doing as far as timing is concerned. I think our timing is way out. Opportunities I see, if we look at residential and commercial, I've got two blocks over here. The block on the left-hand side, top left, says opportunities for residential in sales. There's obviously opportunity for installers in the residential sector for both the mechanical and the electrical. Mechanical would be solar panels, mounting structure, trunking and cabling, and then the electrical would be connecting and commissioning and signing off the COC. So you'll see those two blocks, the two top blocks, left and right, are exactly the same for commercial and industrial. But then in the bottom section of the page, I've got automation on the left-hand side, insurance, repairs and replacements, and financiers and financial programs. So those are opportunities in the residential sector. What does automation mean? Means you can get involved by offering customers automation. You get all sorts of fancy apps, so you can switch your telephone on from your, or you can switch your TV on from your mobile phone. You can open your gate, you can activate your alarm, you can do a whole lot of things through your phone, and that would be automation. So to get involved with automation, giving the customer an opportunity to understand how his property operates, so you'll be able to switch on the electric fencing, activate the alarm, switch the alarm off. So you can do a lot more in the residential environment other than just selling solar systems. Insurance repairs and replacements. There are lots of insurance repairs happening because of theft, because of lightning and surge protection issues. And it's important to understand how you can tap into the insurance market. It's a massive market, and it's a great market to be part of. Financiers and financial programs, get your business registered and get yourself registered with some of the major banks as well as private funders and institutions, because they would be able to send work your way. We are going to be talking about that later on. Shaun's going to cover that in more detail. On the right-hand side, we look at things like genset integration, PLCs, automation and control, monitoring and specialized fault finding. This is what you can offer as a service to diversify your products and services in the commercial and industrial sector. I think I'm going to leave that there. I've got the IV curve and thermal testing mentioned, and I've also got shorts and cable faults mentioned. Unfortunately, IV curve and thermal testing starts raising the bar as far as equipment is concerned. So if you want to have an IV curve tester, it's going to cost you, if you want a decent one, upward of 40,000 Rand. Shorts and cable faults, if you want a decent tester that would be able to test shorts and cable faults, you're probably looking closer between 80 and 100,000 Rand, depending on what it is you want to do. What I wanted to do was was to highlight some opportunities in the sector to diversify your skill set or to diversify your products and services that you offer. Guys, that brings me to the end of that presentation. I'm going to stop sharing quickly, and then I'm quickly going to have a look to see if there are any questions. Hansel says, perhaps the perception that barrier of entry is low because of the technology and the equipment standardization. And let's face it, it's not rocket science. Hansel, it's true, it's not rocket science. But what I find fascinating is there's no end to learning about energy. If you look at, we say it's not rocket science. Sham mentioned the temperature coefficients. Do you understand that when it's cold, the voltage increases, and when it's hot, the voltage decreases? Do you understand that there's a lot of engineering going on in the cable sizing and the cable design? There's a lot of information in power quality, such as harmonics and power factor. So it's just doing an installation, hooking it up and switching it on. That's not rocket science. What is rocket science is as soon as there are issues as far as power factor and harmonics is concerned. If you can't get the generator to integrate with a solar PV system, then it starts getting closer to rocket science, because now you've got different sources that you need to synchronize with one another. So now it starts getting involved, especially at a slightly larger system level. So I would accept that comment as far as the commercial and industrial installations are concerned. Okay, we've got two questions. Hansel says, does the LCOE shown vary across PV system sizes? Absolutely, Hansel. Depends. So you would take your installation cost, you would take your maintenance cost, insurance costs, and any other costs that you want to add in there, and you then divide that over the amount of energy that's been generated, and that can be done over a 1 year or a 5 year or a 10 year or over the life of the system period. So that period can vary. And obviously the amount of energy that's generated is then also going to vary. And if you do the calculation over a period of 10 years, it would be the maintenance cost over 10 years and the energy generated over 10 years. Whereas if you do it over the life, then obviously the costs are going to be more and the energy generated is going to be more.
Starting off with the introductions, my name is Lebo Ntasa. I'm from a company called Untitled Energy, and we also run an e-commerce store called Sun Store as one of the big e-commerce merchants in the country. I'm here with Mr. Sydney Pagati. Sydney, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. I serve mainly as the CEO of iGen, but my core focus within the business is on the sales and marketing side. So, I mean, mainly in terms of this presentation, what we're going to be looking at is how do you go about bootstrapping your entity as an entrepreneur, getting into the business. So our focus point for this presentation will be mainly the new market entrants who are mainly going to be focusing on the residential sector. And of course, we wanted to just make sure that, you know, we just put out some best practices, which obviously we've seen a lot of questions in the market coming from new installers over the past 3 years saying, how do I start up my business? What works, what doesn't work? And our presentation is tailored mainly around answering some of those questions from a bootstrapping perspective. By no means are we saying that this is the gospel, but you know, we thought that we could share just some ideas on our side that make, you know, being a startup in this very exciting industry quite easy. So just touching into that, I wanted to just really run through what the current landscape really looks like. you find that 80% of people that are actually new market entrants or actually are active in this space are the one-man show or the smaller business. Mainly businesses that are ranging in size from 1 to 5 employees. And what we saw in that, of course, is that specifically speaking to them, is that it was very difficult for these new market entrants to really differentiate themselves, outline what their value proposition is. We took note of the fact that everyone is really price sensitive. They've used price as a measure of differentiation, and it shouldn't be the case. And they're always looking for the lowest cost solutions, which doesn't always work in their favor. Again, they were quality and brand agnostic and literally just took information from whoever they can source it from and use it as best practice. And even while getting into this business, noting that you are an entrepreneur, you probably will experience low levels of liquidity within your business. So getting started and finding efficient processes is probably a key driver if you're a new market entrant. We do have, of course, more established businesses who are mid-size with 5 to 15 employees. They make up about 10% of the market. And then you've got EPCs and larger distributors who make up a slightly larger proportion. And again, they also make up about 10% of the market. But I mean, for a focus perspective, we would assume that anything mid-sized all the way to large, those people know what they're doing. They've been in business for longer. They've got the manpower, the capacity. They don't need to bootstrap or take in any of the advice that we're currently going to go through. So for this presentation, we just wanted to outline what are the market drivers, what's currently driving the activity within our sector. From a residential perspective, again, grid instability, load shedding, consumers want to find ways of mitigating that. In residential as well, people are also worried about how they can offset costs, feedback power back into the grid. From a commercial perspective, again, grid instability is still a factor. In commercial, they worry more about peak shaving, load shifting. And from a governmental, commercial, and industrial perspective, there's also grid expansion that's also in the works. But again, as I said, we're likely to just focus mainly on what's going on in the residential sector, along with the smaller players who are new market entrants. There were some important considerations, and I mean, we've had discussions like this over a period of time. What are the important considerations when you're starting up a business? And some of them were understand your target market. You really need to know who you're talking to, why you're selling to them. Have an efficient sales process. By all accounts, being a new business, it means that you don't have all the resources in the world. If you templatize parts of your business, automate as much as possible, hire people as well, you know, you are able to have some form of efficiencies that you can get from the business, right? And then, of course, we'll touch a little bit about how you can achieve having flawless installations and just keeping your costs low within the business. I mean, costs are a big issue within businesses, so you have to try and keep it low. So from our perspective, it's really trying to touch on some of the pain points that will allow people to actually achieve some of their goals, obviously bearing in mind that you don't have a lot of capital going into this for the first time. Speaking of our target markets, I mean, this is always an interesting one for me. I think a lot of people don't spend enough time going through this particular subject. Most times people don't understand who are they serving, what country or region. You can't be all things to all people. You need to understand your age, your demographic, the class in which they're in. That also determines how you're actually going to price. You know, some markets are more price sensitive than others. Other markets are more quality conscious. So you really have to spend the amount of time to look into your business and say, well, who am I targeting? Why am I targeting them? And on top of that, how will they receive that particular service? So I would always advise, and I've had this question over and over again, you know, the spray and pray approach. And I've seen it from people doing it from online marketing, canvassing business. It really doesn't work. And it's not a one size fit all. So what you need to do is really narrow it down and say, why am I doing this? who's the target market, and how am I going to differentiate myself from anybody else that's in the market? It is becoming a crowded space. We have seen the residential market tank, as so nicely put by Carel, but that also means it's also an opportunity for the guys who are really good at what they do to stand out. Yeah. So talking about the efficiencies within a sales process, I think we don't spend enough time investing in client communications. I think client communications need to be more synchronized with buying patterns and the buying cycle, so that people really, you give the right type of information through the actual buying cycle that a customer would actually go through. And I'm going to touch a little bit around that buying cycle because it has changed, especially due to COVID. And of course, some things that you can take notes, tips and tricks. From our side, we also think investing time in efficient tools for quotations and costings. There are many tools out there. We're going to outline just some of the easier ones that are free being the optimum word. I mean, when you're getting into a new business, again, you don't have a lot of money to spend. So finding something that is cost efficient from your side actually helps in terms of the business and also gives you the desired output. I mean, we spoke about this, Lebo, minimizing client visits by using things like the helioscopes or GPS-based design systems. The cost of a call out, the cost of actually going out to seeing a client for the first time, especially if a client is just using that data for budgetary purposes, maybe it is easier just to use some form of GPS-based design and just giving them the initial quote, but then making sure that you're going to educate the client further through the buying cycle, right? And packaging information. I find at most times that people don't package information very well. So we need to, as an industry, and even from an iGen perspective, we have to revamp how we actually package our information, making sure that we can, put together concise communication around what are the frequently asked questions, what are the warranty statements thereof, and also making sure from our side that we could also highlight the references, right? What was the previous work that you've done? Highlight what was good about it. What did you do for the client? Was it, cost efficiencies that were seen in that system? All of those obviously start playing a role in terms of how you actually go about selling. Give realistic figures. A lot of times I've heard things where people say that your solar system can do all things, and it's unfair. It taints the reputation of the industry. Let's be realistic in terms of what solutions we propose and what those solutions are likely to achieve. Yeah, and again, educating ourselves. If you are going to be dealing mainly with customers in the commercial sense, then educate yourself in obviously being able to talk about the tax incentives, because those will be a driver for those particular businesses, right? In terms of just outlining an efficient sales process from our side, things that I found work was, printing out of information, having proof of all the previous work that was done, outlining what were the system objectives in each and every one of those proofs. I also find that in our industry, people don't highlight the fact that they've got workmanship warranties. Some installers don't. And the end user consumer, and this conversation was mainly done based on what I have also received as reference points and almost surveyed the end user consumer, saying, how do we trust the work that we're getting if we're not going to get some form of warranty? What if something goes wrong within the first 2 years of installation? Who do I call? And I think that is also part of the differentiating aspects that you could also bring forward with your proposal, that, if something should go wrong within the first 6 months to 24 months of the system, I'll be there to support you. And this is what I'll be able to cover. And I'll make sure that your system is adequately optimized to meet your needs. And clear understanding of the client's current and future needs. We need to just not assume that the client's needs are not going to evolve. Their current load profiles might not necessarily be in line with what their future needs are likely to be. People might be adding underfloor heating, might be revamping their house. And during that process, we need to say, well, when we initially quoted for a system, we knew that these were the current needs that we were serving, but this is how the system can be scaled up to meet your future needs. And that's stuff that we can really outline, also differentiate the type of product that you're saying, is that product actually able to scale with future needs as well, right? From our side, industry accreditations have become quite important. PQRS, PV Green Card, being able to have an industry accreditation means that you are a trusted source. You're a trusted source of information. You're a trusted source in terms of being able to fulfill on the needs of that particular customer. And in line with industry accreditation, I also believe that training that is provided by manufacturers on their specific product is quite important. And it also just saves the issues that you would have on site. And people should take advantage of that. If you're a new market entrant, you should already go in and say, these are the products that I'm likely to use. Let me go see especially if there's local manufacturers of those products, let me go see them. Let me go get some training, get some hands-on training, understand what the product can and cannot do. Don't purely just read the content and then experience everything on a site. That does taint the reputation of the industry as a whole. What I've also seen is proposals and quotations that are not clear in terms of milestones or what you're actually buying. And I think it's important that we have more proposals that the detailed equipment list, warranty, the payment terms, what were the initial requirements of the customer, and they really take your time in putting that through, because customers are going to go and compare. And at the point of comparison, you'll be found wanting if you didn't detail exactly why you recommended a specific type of solution. And these are just some of the tips and tricks that I think everyone should just take advantage of. Now, when we start talking about buying cycles and what has changed in the buying cycles, one of the things is because of COVID and the civil unrest that occurred in July, I mean, we've seen trends. Typically, our average buying cycles within the industry were 30 to about 90 days. Those have probably been extended to about 120, all the way to about 180 days. It's become more difficult for the consumer. Liquidity is lower in households. Certain households are only reliant on a single income. And of course, as you know, with consumer data showing that on our side, that the consumer is still under constraint. We are likely to recover in the new year. Let's be aware of that change. But what happens during the buying cycle, which is quite important, and this is typically what everyone goes through in their formal way. Some people make decisions a bit quicker, but normally you would have a need recognition. You would understand that you do have a need. You do have a need for a residential solar system. And once you have outlined that need, the first thing that's likely to happen is that you're going to want to understand how much are you in for? How much is this really going to quote? Is this really going to cost you? So you're going to go into the market and you're going to use the spray and pray approach, where you go, really, let me get an understanding of pricing. And once you have done that and everyone comes back to you with all the information, you're going to then do an information search where you basically say, well, how do I verify this data? How do I go about making sure that I'm getting the best value for money? And then you're going to evaluate the alternatives. Whilst you're doing that, evaluating the alternatives, you're then going to get into a purchasing decision and a post or after sales behavior. But this all happens normally within a period of 90 days. What normally happens though from businesses is that they lose communication. So a lot of time is someone gives you an initial quote and then they say nothing during that period. And that's where they lose you in your buying cycle. So one of the key tips and tricks that I think we should also take advantage of from our side as an industry is during all of these different buying cycles and parts of that particular process, let's give the information to the customer that they need. During the need recognition stage, make sure that you've outlined costings. How are those costings obviously in line with what the customer's requirements are? Give them enough comparative information. If you have proposed a specific type of system, compare it with the other systems that are on the market and say, why should you be buying this? Because you know that this customer is going to go and evaluate alternatives. So give them the information so that you can save them the time, be a trusted source of information. And once the purchasing decision has occurred, be clear in terms of outlining what is the after-sales process that they can expect after that. So you've installed the system, it is a major purchase, it's an investment. Then be clear in terms of, what are we going to do after that to make sure that it's optimized to meet your needs. And that is what's clearly going to differentiate you from anyone else on the market. But all of this is you also understanding what happens in the terms of the customer's buying cycle and creating and templatizing this type of communication in order for you to obviously meet that customer's needs during the different parts of that buying cycle. Some of the cheaper and easy to get essential tools within a startup or a new market entrance, I would say get a decent website and preferably do it on WordPress. There's lots of support around WordPress, but a lot of times people say, they think a website is a static thing that you just put on the web and hopefully it will get you customers. But I refer to it as the digital salesperson. So think about when we call and give it a persona and we say a website is a digital salesperson, it has a function, it has a job, it has to go out there and get customers. So it has to represent how you and your business operate. And when you're dealing with a digital salesperson, you really need to look deeper into your website and understand, is it giving the customer the right information? Is it going to process and run the customer through a funnel that ultimately will allow me to engage the customer? Because I'm likely to engage with your website first before I actually meet you. So is it representative of the work and the output that you are finally going to deliver? Accounting systems, very important. We can't go back and people still doing things on Excel. Have a proper accounting system, whether it be Sage or Xero. They're cost efficient as well. It doesn't cost you a lot, but the reality is that it will also affect you in terms of attracting future funding. And by keeping proper record, you are able to see the trends within your business, right? From an email marketing perspective, I still think email marketing is one of the cheapest ways to get your name out there. But we have to also take into account the fact that there is Poppy. Poppy has been enacted, and one of the key things that you have to do is obviously make sure that you allow people to opt in or opt out of content. It's the first messages that you send to them, and you also keep it to what was the intended purpose. When you're sending that communication, you can't just use that data or people's data to do anything else except the intended purpose. But from an email marketing perspective, being able to talk to all of the customers that would have interacted with you, whether it be physical, from a digital perspective as well, and being able to disseminate that information quicker. Just highlighting what happens and why I personally recommended MailChimp is that for a database size up to 2,000 contacts, you can send up to 5,000 emails for free. And that puts you in a position where you can really highlight what differentiates you in your business for nothing. Social media accounts, again, there are some that I think are quite effective. LinkedIn, Facebook, WhatsApp, but you have to prepare content that is ready for those particular mediums, right? In LinkedIn, you know that you're going to be more formal in nature. In Facebook, you're catching people in a slightly more casual setting, driving them to your place of business, which is your website. With WhatsApp, you need to have information that can be fit for WhatsApp, easy to share. Instagram, I purposely did not highlight Twitter. You can get Twitter very wrong. and for those of you who probably can work within 160 characters and get it right, probably that's the platform. But I would stay clear of that unless you're really a specialist in terms of communication. Putting together a professional domain. G Suite offers you a lot of tools, but I mean, I think we've gone past this the age where you can have an @Gmail or an @webmail email address and expect people to see you as professional. On G Suite, you are able to actually mask that domain and actually have a professional domain name that is attached to it, and the other tools that G Suite allows you to have, from scheduling tools, meeting tools. It's really fantastic for its price point. Having a CRM is also going to help you a lot in terms of being able to look at trends in your business, how people are actually moving through that buying cycle, understanding the patterns, understanding why you lose deals, why certain deals are won, being able to track that, putting tasks together. The assumption is that you're going to interact with hundreds of people. How are you going to keep track of that over a period of 2-3 months? And understanding that the buying cycle has been extended to about 120 days. In 4 months, you wouldn't remember who you spoke to in January. And then the reality is that the easiest way to go back to that conversation, have follow-ups, have routine communication that still drives someone through that buying cycle or that funnel and process, is by having a CRM. Some of these CRMs that I've highlighted, like HubSpot and Zoho, I mean, some of the starter packages are free. And then they put you in a position where you can then move to more premium subscriptions, which have more functionality. But it's a great place to really understand how the behavior of your consumers is. And by putting notes, having a CRM, you're able to then say, in my business, this is what actually happens. This is the driver. We are currently experiencing this downward trend because. But if you're not keeping track of that information, you are not even able to, from your side, technically shift or pivot your business. Yeah.
Yeah, and Sid, from a practical point of view, I think the next step is you've mentioned quite a lot of tools. How do you then make it happen if you are a one-man show? We're talking about startup businesses here, and here again we're talking about all these tools that need to be operated. So the most important thing to consider when you're starting up is that there is a pool out there of young people that are waiting to be employed. There's a lot of kids that are going into colleges and universities and are looking for their startup jobs as well. So there are opportunities out there to say, I'm an electrician, I go on roofs, I do the wiring bit, but the marketing bit in the accounting, etc., in the background, I can be assisted by young people. And here's some of the avenues that can be used to get people into your company. The Yes for Youth, the Itukise initiatives, these are just two of the many examples out there. So make use of those opportunities. And the other opportunity as well in employing young people now is that with the work from home approach that we have all adopted in the last year, means you don't necessarily have to go out and seek premises. They can still do all this work for you while still working at home. So I think this is a brilliant opportunity for people to look into, to say that there are people out there that can assist in your business to make it more efficient and to make it more professional. So please do make use of that. The other issue also is if we don't employ young people, we know what the risks are. There are major socioeconomic time bombs that are sitting out there, and we really, all of us must make it our mission to at least get people on board into our businesses.
Well, the thing about it as well, from a capacity perspective, these or should I say these programs that are currently out there, I mean, they do support you in terms of making sure that they actually pay a certain proportion of the salary that you would have had to cover for recruiting someone. I mean, they look at it from an experiential training perspective. That candidate can be with you for 12 to 18 months, and if their cost is partially partially subsidized by the government, from 50 to about 75%, there's no real big impact on your business. And taking advantage of having young, energetic people entering the work stream and also adding that extra capacity that you need as a startup, I think it's a brilliant opportunity.
Yes, no, on the issue of cost, it really is cost effective to get the young people in. Thanks, Sid, for that. And moving into flawless installations, at Sunstore, we do sell hardware, but we also are involved in installations. And I would like to share with you then what really works, what makes it, although the word flawless is really, there's nothing flawless, let's just say close to perfect installations out there. Why do we need close to perfect installations? Is that we don't want comebacks. The most important thing is once you've gone through an installation, you don't want to have to go back again. And first thing, training is very critical. It's very important that you have people with the right wiring, the right skill set that can wire properly. That's one thing. But the second thing is there's also a need to have proper product information. People must install products that they know to avoid going up and down. So it's very important to do that. Once you don't have that in place, you are likely going to have comebacks, which are then costly for your business. And the second thing is there's lots of products out there. See, there's lots of inverters, there's lots of everything out there.
We've seen that, right?
Yeah, so it is always best to standardize on products that you know and you know well, with all their supporting wires and connections and everything else. So to standardize would make it easy for you to not only sell efficiently, but to also install flawlessly and professionalize as well.
Yeah.
So that is very, very important. And the third one is that there's a cost to putting an installation. So the quicker an installation is better. It's always better to have a one-day installation rather than a 3-day installation. So as a business, we've got to find creative ways of shortening the time it takes to install. That might mean getting products that are easy to install or products that you install in your warehouse upfront. Before you go on site. That's called pre-commissioning. So think about those that will make your installations then cheaper. And the fourth thing is there are inverters out there that are being installed without remote monitoring. They are being sold out there and installed. The bad thing about that seat is if a client calls and says, I've got a problem, you can't even look where you are sitting, what could be the problem. It means you then do call out. So all these are costly. These are things to talk about, to think about. You might want to install cheaper hardware upfront, but there's a cost related to that down the road as well.
I think the cost is actually even bigger than just the initial upfront cost. There's a reputational risk element as well, and that can be seen as a cost, right? On the basis that now this is not working, the client is unhappy, they are everywhere in every medium possible complaining about it. You can't fix it on time. So I mean, those are things that are quite important to be mindful of, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And keeping costs low, as we already said, buying a solar system, it's a major cost for consumers mostly. And it's very important to ensure that we keep our costs as low as possible. Now, the big EPCs out there have got buying power, but there's nothing stopping smaller players who are in the residential area to club together and buy in bulk as well. You can still get a container from China of solar panels and shade around. That would make more sense as an example. And we've already mentioned number 2, back office systems that will make it cheaper for you to work. You might consider things like call answering services, project scheduling systems, or even accounting systems to make things cheaper for you.
Easier, more seamless.
Yes.
Yeah. I think by all accounts as well, just having strategic collaborations. You can't be everywhere at all times.
Yes.
And being able to share resources with other installers allows you to have more coverage. You co-op in terms of how you actually buy material. I mean, there's common material that you all use. It puts you in a position where you can actually negotiate more favorable rates with whichever supplier, if you have that. And we've actually seen some of that already taking place in the market. And it works for the businesses, but I mean, getting into any relationship always is a bit tricky. But in most situations, having that type of collaboration also allows you to share skills, past knowledge, increase the coverage in terms of how much area you actually cover. And it's something that people should be taking advantage of. And it moves from just having a micro business because of your collaboration and maybe call it joint venture in some cases, you are able to actually bid and do larger scale installations, right?
Yes. And geographically as well, it allows you to be able to work in places that you might not necessarily be able to go. So if you've got good collaborations out there with other installers and other businesses, then it allows you to even grow. Because the most important thing, I guess, for all of us is how do we grow, how do we sustain and grow our businesses? And that's just one area, collaboration with others.
Yeah.
Sydney.
On the issue of cash flow, we know that installations take long.
In between cash flow. Yeah.
If it's an installation that costs 100,000 rand, a customer won't give you 100,000 rand upfront. They will not be ready to give all the money upfront. They will give you some deposit, but you still need to do some work. And how do you then bridge between the money you get and the money you're going to get into the future? So some funding into the business needs to come in. And we have found that there are companies out there that allow for bridging finance, like Bridgement and Hulaland. But most importantly, those companies would like you to have a proper setup. Like we already were talking about accounting systems. You have to have proper accounting systems to be able to leverage some of the cash flow or the funding that they can give to you. So it's very important to have a proper working business so that you can then be able to improve your cash flow through the use of these people.
Sydney and Lebo. Wait. Before you guys continue.
Sid, the solar PV industry is dynamic, but it's also highly competitive. So we need to have some attributes as people. The first one is we have to be very creative. As we said, it's cutthroat. It wants creativity from us. And it needs energy and consistency. You must be at it. You must be wanting to work. You must be quick. You must be on the ball. And most importantly, you must have patience to build a trusted brand. It takes time, and you have to invest your time into a business in order for it to grow. So that's it. I think, Sid, we can take questions then from the floor. Thank you.
Hi, guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Wow.
We had actually switched off all the mics.
Yeah, I actually tried to stop you about 3 or 4 minutes ago.
Okay.
Just to let you know that you were running over time, and as it is, I think the program is half an hour behind. So we have 2 minutes for questions and answers. I think it's your presentation has been well received. It's a set of information that one would think should be fairly obvious, but I think it's been a information with practical advice and information to share. Did we have a question? Oh, okay. That's why you've got some feedback on your side, which I think has now been sorted. Guys, I've actually had a lot of good feedback on the presentation. I don't have any questions, just a lot of guys saying thank you very much for the information, and everybody said that they enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, that's great. Sydney, that was great and useful information. Lebo, thank you very much. Shaun asked, what platform is best to use for marketing and connecting with your consumers? But I don't know whether there's a straight there's a straight answer on which platform is the best. Sydney, do you have a minute to answer that question? Which marketing platform, social media platform is the best platform in your opinion?
Look, I think the easiest one to get into, where you can literally break down geography, location, would probably be Facebook. You find a lot of people there, and you're able to just narrow it down, whether it be your locality or a specific region, and you can actually target people very specifically. and go further into the targeting around about their interests in terms of content that they read, in terms of their interests in terms of technology. So I think Facebook is probably the easiest and cheapest to get into.
The idea of the presentation is just to have a look and get a feel for the successes of women in a male-dominated industry. And it sounds like something that is a weird topic to have on a solar presentation, but I had a few discussions with ladies in the recent week, shall we call it, where they feel they've got an upper hand over men in the solar sector. So I think I'd like to hear from the ladies what the experiences are and what puts them ahead of the guys, so to speak, in a male-dominated industry. Lebo, are you there?
Oh, okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Do you quickly want to give us just a minute of background? What is it that you've done at the moment? You've got a business that you're running, the one that you've just promoted. What is your background and how did you get there? You've literally got 60 seconds.
I've got a background in chemistry and started working in the petrochemical industry. But after doing my MBA, I then ventured into different industries, including financial services, etc. And I'm here now in the renewable energy business, and we are doing home solar. We also do large scale. We involved in some projects here and there. Yes. So how did I get into the industry? Is that around 2012, my sister and myself thought about the new ventures that were happening then in the REAP, and we took interest in that. That's how we ended up in the industry. So that's a brief background about me. You said a minute. I could talk about a whole hour, but so I'm trying to contain it in just a minute. Yes.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's great. Thank you very much. What is your, so you've been involved in the solar sector since 2012 with the REAP programs. What is your experience been in the industry as a lady? How, if you had to give someone advice based on your experiences, what would that advice be in order for other women to get involved in the solar sector?
I've had good experiences and not so good ones, but the one that I want to highlight is in this country, we are told that we are looking for Black women-owned companies. We want to give women opportunities, etc. But in reality, it's not as easy as that. So we still have to fight for business like everybody else fights for business. So I have found that it is not necessarily a good thing that you are a woman-owned business. You don't get anything on the plate. You actually have to compete. Very often you suffer prejudice because people do not imagine using women in certain industries. And I'll give an example. It is okay if you are a woman to sell, perhaps to sell goods in this industry and maybe to do a few other things. But when it comes to wiring, there could be some prejudice. So people would find it easy, as an example, to get a Black woman company to do certain things in the industry, or a woman's company to do certain things in the industry, but not necessarily others. So when it comes to doing hard stuff, it is not as easy as it looks. But because this is a growing industry, there is room for everyone. You just have to have the same drive, you have to be committed, you have to want to build a drive. So yes, in the positive point, you have to be just as ruthless and hungry as others. But at some point you have to look out and work harder because of the prejudice that might be in place. So yes, that's what I'm saying is positive and negative. It's a good growing industry for everyone, whether you are a woman or not, but you also have to work harder to show that you can deliver just as good as anyone else.
Wow. Okay, that is excellent. Excellent feedback, Lebo. Thank you very much. Because of the time constraint, I want to hear if Natalie is on the. Natalie, are you available? I know Natalie was. Natalie.
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. Can you give us a little bit of a background, also around a minute, if I think that's more or less how quickly you introduced yourself with our first conversation. So if you could quickly run over that again, that'd be great.
Not a problem. Okay, so I started off in renewable energies for Synergy here in South Africa, and I've now expanded working on projects in Europe, Ireland, Spain, for an international company on a consulting basis as a project specialist. And I've also got my company, which I've got joint ventures with Fixed Tilt Systems.
Okay.
As well as development on the 100 megawatt projects for private build.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, what's your, when did you start? Did you also start in the industry just after somewhere in the 2010s?
It was 2012 when I went in with Synergy for the...
Okay, more or less the same.
Yes.
More or less the same time frame as Lebo. And I'm going to ask you the same kind of question. What's your experience been in the industry? Lebo says you have to just work just as hard, and there are some prejudices. What was your experience?
So I found that, you know, working in a male dominant environment, you have to adapt to the male way of doing things. So you still your ladylike when it comes to business and meetings, but generally in the office, in order to fit in better, you need to adapt, and you cannot be faint-hearted with men around, and you've got to just accept the way that they are and the way that they speak, and it's okay. It is not directed at you as a woman. It is just how they are with speech. Like I said, I don't want to use it in the bad term, but if a woman is assertive, like I was on site, you get referred to as the bee with a clipboard.
I understand. Yeah, I understand. So a quick question. You have almost an international exposure to solar installations. What kind of advice would you be able to give other women to be able to get to where you are if you have to look back?
Sorry, just hold me 1 second. So you need to definitely on LinkedIn, connect with as many people as possible. Don't be afraid to show what you have done and the experience that you've got. And even if it looks like something that wouldn't interest people locally, it is something that they're definitely looking at on an international basis. So within South Africa, what happened with COVID, a lot of our projects all came to a halt, but Europe and that are now starting to move forward, and they are short-skilled out there. They are looking for people.
Okay, so your feedback would be more based along the lines of social media and exposing yourself, or almost like creating a brand of who you are and what you're capable of doing.
Exactly. And don't be scared to set up a company. You know, as a woman, go into the industry, even if it is under a consulting company, go in and do it. If everybody else can, so can you.
Okay, that's excellent. Natalie, that's great feedback. And seeing that you are talking about setting up companies, I think I would like to jump to Kirstie quickly. If Kirstie's online, Kirstie has started her own business, and she started it a couple of years ago. Also, women-owned business. Kirstie, out in Pretoria, do you want to give us a quick 1-minute introduction?
Yes, sure. Hi, I'm Kirstie. I was in the industry probably around about the same time as Lebo, around about 2011, 2012. I opened up my own company 4 years ago. And yeah, it's tough being in the mail industry, but it's a lot of fun.
What's the name of your business, and what do you guys do?
True Solar Solutions. We do mostly residential, a little bit of commercial, but mostly residential, because you know what, I find it more satisfying for myself, bonding with the clients, and you know, so that's what we do. We take you right from the beginning, right off the grid, and then after service. So yeah.
That's excellent. Now, your experience as a business owner, also in the type of environment that you're in, what's your experience been? And yeah.
Look, I must admit, it is a bit difficult being a woman in the solar industry. You get a lot of male clients that either think you don't know anything because you are a woman, or other male clients that actually find you very interesting. I think that women in the solar industry have more attention to detail when it comes to, you know, putting up the inverters and making sure that it's straight. So I think it gives us a bit of an advantage, and the women clients out there actually enjoy the input. I have a lot of women clients that they like and trust that I'm a woman, especially the women alone on the farms. You know, you're doing this big 3-phase expensive system, and this woman needs to know how to run her system, and that bond that you make with your client at the end of the day is very important. Yeah, and generally I'm on site with every single installation, so I find that important. The bonding with your client is very important, and I like being a woman in that field, so I tend to cook with a woman in the kitchen.
I think it's something that we don't always consider. Is although it might be a male-dominated industry, the consumer that you're selling to is not always the man. You have a lot of women clients, and you have a lot of female clients, and you have a lot of women making the decisions. And in many of those instances, a lot of women would prefer dealing with other women. So yeah, that's fascinating. That's good feedback.
Because a lot of the men work away from home, the women are alone. So if there is an error 4 and it's a low battery or this or that, the woman doesn't know how to deal with the system. So you need to actually teach the woman how to work with the system. And you know what? Some of the women surprise their own husbands. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Okay. So for someone else, we do have some ladies joining us today. For them to start up their own business, any advice if you look back at what you've done and what you've achieved?
I think, you know what, a woman tends to have a good heart in the business. Maybe that is a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to selling points. But I think if you're a woman, go for it. Keep that heart, because the softness of the woman, as well as the business side where you make sure everything is perfect on your installation, the women just bring another dynamic into the industry. So go for it. We need more women out there. Also, another thing, networking with your suppliers, your women, other installers in South Africa. We should all get together and network, because you keep that network going, you help each other out. You're not against each other, you're with each other. We're all in the same industry. So yeah, go for it. I mean, you're welcome to contact me as well, and meet up.
I think the association should actually create a steering committee that looks at female-owned businesses and operating as a female-owned business in the industry. I think that's a good idea.
Yes, thanks very much for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, Kirstie. Thanks for your input. Yolande, do you quickly want to give us a short introduction and a bit more information about yourself?
Sure. So I got involved in the solar industry around 2014, coming from LED lighting. And I've been involved ever since then. I'm currently looking at sales and actually all of the solar aspects at a company called Caesar Africa IT Group. And then from November, I'll be moving on as sales manager for Amber Energy.
Okay. That's great. And your experience. So what's interesting is we've had Lebo, who's also started her own business. We've got Natalie with her own consultancy. We've got Kirstie, and you're involved with sales. What's your experience been over the last couple of years?
It's actually quite interesting. I talk to the suppliers as well, and you learn a lot from your suppliers. So I think that's very important as a woman in the industry, that you know your product, because like Lebo mentioned as well, you don't always it's taken seriously when you speak to a client, especially if it's a male client. But if you can stand your ground and really, really explain to them what the system can do and what they actually need versus what maybe they think they need, you gain a lot of respect very quickly, and then they actually listen to you. So I think that's an advantage being a woman, but you have to make sure that you know your product and you know what you are talking about, or else you're just going to fall for the stereotype.
Okay, so it's about empowering yourself with information so that you can outsmart the guys.
Yes, definitely. That's perfect.
No, sorry, go.
It's happened about 2 weeks ago. There was a supplier that we've been using for a while on the electrical side that came to see me specifically because they have now ventured into also supplying solar components, inverters, panels. And he's explaining the product, and I've actually worked with the product before, and he's explaining it wrong. And I could say, okay, but this is not how it actually works. And he actually sat in the boardroom for an hour with me explaining to the supplier how solar works. So it's interesting. You get a lot of those. And again, it's important that you know what you are talking about. And now, obviously, this supplier will jump through hoops to just keep us happy because he knows that I know what he's doing and not doing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I just want to go back to your introduction. What was the very first job you had before you started in the solar sector?
I worked for a company that was involved in the rebate program on the LED lights of Eskom. Later on, they started the distribution wing of the company, and I was basically national sales for them. So we didn't sell directly to the public, we just sold to distributors. And they started working with a solar company, and I obviously helped them with the lighting side. And then they said, okay, but we need someone that can do sales and can do sales really well. And then they approached me and said, well, would you be interested in joining us? And that's basically how I got into the solar industry.
I think what's fascinating here is listening at the almost the journey. If you look at how long it's taken to get the amount of knowledge that you have at the moment, it's not, you didn't start a year ago or 2 years ago. You spoke about, if I remember correctly, 2014.
Yes.
So that's 7 years. So it takes a lot of time to gather that amount of information, and it takes a lot of time to get your head around solar as a technology. I get a lot of guys that join the courses and they want to know, are they qualified after a 3-day or after a 2-day course? And I think what's important is to maybe take your feedback and maybe what all of you have said, something that I think is a line that's drawn across the whole conversation is commitment, dedication and hard work. So it's not, nothing is handed to you on a platter. What I like about what you've also said is how you've also between the group of ladies is how you have a different approach to customers. Yes. How you have a different approach to information and information sharing. And I think although it's a male-dominated industry, I think that a lot of the business owners out there could actually use this information and strategize in order to to get their business a bit more diversified, have more women in their business, because it could add a completely different look and feel to your staff complement.
Definitely. I can give you another example, and this is actually, it's quite stupid, but it's hilarious. A couple of years ago, we were really trying to get into one of the mines, and we just could not get an appointment. So eventually, I made contact with them and got an appointment. I literally got that appointment because I am a woman. I thought it would be funny to have a woman on the technical side on the mine. And we got in, and we actually sold a lot of stuff to them. Because they actually, when we spoke, they actually listened and said, okay, well, she knows what she's talking about. And it worked. So you have to use it to your advantage. You have to identify your advantages and then use them.
Thanks to all the ladies for participating. So, Jacques, well, you're welcome to take the floor and, yeah, share your screen.
iGen is essentially a battery supplier, but we don't see ourselves as just a company that does storage. We see ourselves as a tech company that is interested in the technical aspect of storage. How you apply it, whether it be residential, commercial, the technologies that go with it, but also how that is positioned within the market. We are very interested to see how it's essentially a catalyst, and I do cover that a little bit later. Enabling a lot of options and usage patterns for energy itself. I think we all can agree that energy is essentially a basic human right, similar to what water is. These days, if you're not in line with internet or electricity for that matter, you feel deprived. And I don't think for social upliftment, you can't expect the social aspect to gain any traction if you don't have that basic necessities. And I'm not talking about social media and that. It's just access to information, access to actual data and the rest of the world. I mean, a lot of jargon is out of in the industry, you know, fourth industrial revolution, etc. So we'll touch a little bit on that going into it. So my presentation is essentially just covering storage, a bit of a trends, the caption of where storage going was given. So I just want to have a bit of a discussion around that, if that's fine. So just a quick point of what I'm going to discuss. On a storage options, why do you want to use storage? What is it there for? A few trends that we've seen in the industry over the last few years, financial positioning, a lot of that has already been covered. Future tech, what is lying ahead? What is really getting traction commercially? Recent events, compliances, Sham also covered on that also, and what is the takeoffs from that? And just a quick caption, also Sham also touched on that, on best practices, what we've also experienced on our side, just to share a little bit of really go over the basics and make sure that your installations are correct. And we'll take that in higher detail a little bit later on. Energy storage, why do you want to use that? If you look at energy, everyone talks about green energy, how energy is being generated. And if you look at these sources, they are not always consistent. The sun only shines a few hours a day. The wind only blows so hard for some of the time of the season. And energy storage essentially gives you the option of moving that energy where you want. So with storage, you can take control of where you want to use your energy. Storage has also really proven itself to be quite a modular concept. Most storage offerings are quite modular. You can be placed basically next to your generation site. You don't have to have it off-site. And it can scale as your demands are changing. You can also have it in front of the meter, your utility side, or you can have it behind the meter, obviously at different scales. If you're looking internationally, people like California that have had a lot of solar or PV systems connected to their grid, in the industry, we call it the duck curve. And storage has really helped to flatten that curve. And that was pre-COVID, when flatten the curve had a different meaning. So storage is really giving them a lot of flexibility. And if you look at grid scale applications also, you're looking at storage enabling the grid connections essentially to handle changes within the millisecond. In the old days, you had peaker plants, you had different ways of assisting the grid, but you essentially had to wait for those things to come online before you can actually have it available. And with storage, you really have a really almost real-time buffer that you can build to make sure that you can provide electricity, frequency shifting and voltage regulation, all of those value adds that is really on the grid scale side. Energy continuity also, us here in Africa really feel that as a reality. People in Europe have experienced it in the last few years. But before that, really, unstable grid wasn't something that was known to a lot of people. For us also, as I mentioned, social upliftment and access to resources. And it's not just electricity. We see a lot of applications where people are really needing electricity just to get water out of the ground or pump it or reticulate it from one place to another. And then obviously the communication aspect of that also. And storage has really proven to be a true catalyst for energy utilization. So the question was posed, where's storage going? And that's essentially up. I wanted to finish the slide here, but maybe let's just have a quick discussion and look at where it is really going. So if you're looking globally, there's been a major growth across all storage technologies. You're looking at pumped hydro, thermal, PV. All of these technologies have seen great growth within the last few years. This is now even with the pandemic. Currently, your lithium-based batteries or storage is still the market leader because it's so flexible and it's one of the most efficient technologies also. I think we can just quickly touch on lithium as a subset. Just be careful when you say lithium batteries. Not all is the same. You can say a car is something with 4 wheels, but you get cars with 3 wheels, and you get different types of cars. You get different makes and qualities also. So in lithium as a subset, you need to basically make sure also that in the old days, you had lithium polymer batteries that had a lot of thermal issues. We'll talk a little bit later on that in more detail. The EV market is still the driving force behind the lithium battery and the lithium storage technology as such. And that is also where the adoption is going. If you look at the traction that EV and manufacturers are just looking at EVs have taken in the last few, I would say about almost a year, there's really almost a space race that's happening where everyone just wants to have EVs as a full-fledged offering by 2030. This is also going to have a knock-on effect on our grid stability and what we offer. So we essentially need to be cognizant of that also. And the biggest growth that we foresee also and what we have seen is essentially front of meter applications. So this is now utility scale, supply and distribution side. Trends globally. This is quite interesting to see that Germany essentially did in 1 quarter what we do in a year annually. But we've seen a strong growth in hybrid systems. So when you talk about PV systems, it can be grid tied PV only. Hybrid systems is when you start putting storage together with that to give you some more flexibility, more options of using that storage on the PV system for that. The USA has seen 300% year-on-year growth, UK 70%, especially when there's federal tax credits applicable. And then also if there's a real need to do frequency regulation and hybrid enablement in that vicinity. So it all depends. We all know that one site and one application is not the same as the next. So it's really, that is also the strong point of storage. We essentially get that flexibility. And when you get to a system design level, you essentially need to make sure that you know what your client's needs are also. As you guys mentioned before, locally, we've seen a downturn in Q1, especially on the residential side, but we see a sharp upturn in the more commercial C&I space. And we see that trend following also internationally, especially now with COVID being more of a normality than anything else. So globally, we've seen a great increase also between year-on-year of installations. They're talking about 5 gigawatt hours. So that is a lot of electrons, a lot of capacity being installed. And we also see that the project sizes are increasing because of the systems pricing essentially coming down. So it actually makes more sense. And you already had the discussion of the ROI before. Local also, you mentioned earlier a little bit of that calculation. There's a bit of arbitrage that we can do going forward, and a lot of experts in the market feel that within the next 12 to 24 months, we will see that pivotal point where energy storage together with PV will actually become something of a game player compared to your tariff rates as what we get from our utility provider. This is an epic point, and I think PV was already at that point in 2020. That is already proven, and we can see that trend continuing, and that is going to open the market to a lot more opportunities also. Our local supply is still constrained. We've got still rate increases. And there's mounting pressure on Eskom for the emission control. Just yesterday, there was a report on Eskom now being the biggest sulfur dioxide emitter in the world, outclassing the likes of China that we normally expect to be the biggest producers. And this doesn't bode well for the current position of the utility supply. Just a quick touch on future technology. When you are looking at lithium, people are also trying to match lithium technologies together with others. Each technology has got its strong and weak points. You basically have got flow batteries that can give you longer energy, and people are looking at how they can match that together. You're looking at capacitors together with lithium and traction systems. All of these different applications, it plays essentially and confirms how flexible storage actually is. There's a lot of people that are looking at combining lithium with hydrogen electrolyzer projects, making sure that you can essentially have other renewable sources also together within that mix. Solid state is another basically cell form factor, if you want to call that. But all of these, together with your new chemistries like sodium ion, needs to have a bit of commercial scale to it before it can really compete with lithium technologies as a greater scale. What is quite nice to see is how people apply storage. With EVs coming into the fore and really getting traction internationally and locally also, a lot of technology is going towards taking the storage that's in the EV within the electric car and maybe on the real time and as what you are needed, moving that back to the grid. So that is called vehicle to grid methodologies and growth. And people are seeing how they can use these technologies, but you have to have something that is clever. And that is where you start seeing clever batteries, where you've got full asset management and monitoring, over-the-air updates, and essentially an IoT device. And the cleverer these batteries are getting, the more use applications we will see going forward. All of this essentially plays to something called energy as a service. And we see a lot of people playing in that space, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that will talk about that a little bit later. But you essentially need to have a very clever device together with the rest of the inverters and etc., the rest of the system, to be able to either react quickly or report and make sure that you can offer something over a period of time. Just as storage, we've really come a long way since the 1990s when Sony brought out the first lithium battery, which is quite encouraging. Just a few events that have happened in the last few years. There's been a major growth for industrial size batteries, Moss Landing being one of the biggest, but they've also been, unfortunately, at the headlines for fires that have happened. We've also seen factory recalls from LG Energy for the residential batteries, some from BioNTech, but this was all based on the NMC lithium chemistry, which is very, very difficult to manage in thermal runaway. So when you're looking at storage and what you are using, be very knowledgeable about what chemistry you are using, what is the strong points, what is the weak points of it. As iGen, that is essentially the reason also we are using lithium iron phosphate, which is one of the older the lithium chemistries, but one of the stable also, especially when it comes to thermodynamics. So with all of these events in the market, this has really highlighted the importance to develop your incident response plans. So when you have a big project, essentially be in contact with the people that will be supporting that infrastructure, whether it be the municipality, whether it be your fire response crews. We had discussions about mines. All of these places have got people that will basically look after the safety of the project and interface with them and give them guidance what the best practices are. But also monitoring. If you have a system that has got monitoring in place that can actually forewarn you on an event it will give you that lead time essentially of helping you to have a good response time and make sure that the damage is essentially constrained. That was also proven in Moss Landing. The first fire that happened there, they took days to actually extinguish the fire. The next one was quite quick. So when you look out for technical solutions to this, look for offerings also that can add basically benefits that have got added safety guards built in, like on-demand or even liquid cooling, as an offering, HVAC and also fire suppression systems built in. That's now at the larger scale. And you'll see these technologies trickling down into your smaller scale batteries also. This all speaks to installed issues. So just some guidelines to follow. On the solar PV side, obviously we've already spoken about the over voltage that you sometimes might have in winter. So thank you so much for touching on that. Just yesterday, I heard about a system that used GP wire, AC wire for PV paneling. Make sure that your correct cabling is there, the size is correct. We already touched on the cable connections, especially on the DC side, and for the bigger systems, it's even more prevalent. Make sure that it's earth also. And then also check that your weight loading calculations is correct for installing PV on the roof. You don't always have a roof that can actually handle that weight. So just make sure everything is safe and properly engineered. When it comes to batteries, make sure that your system sizing is correct. We've got people that have got a lot of cloudy weather at the moment. It depends how clever your system is, but a lot of the times we see that systems are under-spec'd and the batteries don't charge full, and you don't get the performance out of the system that you essentially want. Bear in mind also, when you have load shedding, all of that load characteristics, most of the time, falls onto the battery to carry. And the PV will essentially assist with that, and that will essentially have a different demand profile. So just be careful for that also, or if you're going to go off grid totally. Be also cognizant of your incorrect battery charge settings. I've seen a lot of systems where people just install the battery and they run lead acid system because that's the defaults on the system. You need to make sure that what you are installing, that you are making the settings essentially for what is compliant for that. Also, when you have batteries installed in poor ventilated areas, it doesn't matter what chemistry you are using, even if you want to use lead acid batteries, all of this have got safety guidelines and ventilated requirements. Heat built up, everything battery together with inverter within an enclosed space. All of these considerations is something that you need to take into consideration. Also in very hot conditions, we've got a lot of systems running in Botswana, ambient temperatures of 40 degrees Celsius and plus. Make sure that you are complying, and also just make sure about the longevity of the project that you basically want to adhere to. If you have a very high ambient heat certain times of the year, you have to cool the system down or ventilate it out. It's been proven, many white papers out there. This is essentially a chemistry or chemical reaction. The colder it runs, the better it is for all electronics involved. Also, just check your poor and your connections that you are doing to the batteries. As was mentioned before, also double check all your connections and obviously observe all of the safety and health protocols. How do you know and learn about all of these things for people that are new to the industry? Once again, we just come back to training. Find out local to yourself, if you're not in South Africa, what are the compliances that you have to adhere to? Schedule 2 is currently still in draft form, but you essentially have a good guideline there together with NRS and your SANS compliance to know what needs to be done. Go through your training, upskill yourself and maintain that, please, because it's always being a tech positioning, essentially, you will always have things changing. And you'll see that a lot of the vendors are moving their training online. So no one has really got an excuse to not attend training and be upskilled and be knowledgeable within what you are doing. That's essentially all from my side. Thank you so much.
Wow, Jacques, excellent. Thank you very much. The timing was perfect. So we've got a couple of minutes to cover a couple of questions quickly. We had a question from Lo, wanting to know, and I understand that you guys focus primarily on lithium ion, but Lo wanted to know whether you do get lead acid batteries that have a a relatively large cycle life or a relatively long cycle life, and there I'm thinking of something like what they call glass batteries.
Yes,
but
glass
that was
fiber.
a question that I think was, yeah.
Yes, you do. But you have to also just go through the spec sheet and compare it with lithium offerings. So they are slightly higher in price, but also you need to see your cycle count and the temperature variance that you can do. Your lithium chemistries can handle a lot more temperature variance, where on lead acid you're a little bit constrained with that. So it's a big comparison. Compare your price, compare your cycles that you can do, and compare your temperature tolerance, and obviously your C rating. Your C rating is essentially how much power you can take out from your storage. Sometimes your installation needs a higher C rating, where some of the technologies or some even of the lithium offerings can't handle a high output.
Okay, Jacques, that's great advice. Thanks. You did mention somewhere about the charging voltages for lithium, and those would be different to the charging voltages of these lead acid batteries. I think that would be one of the big mistakes that guys make when they do the installations, right?
Correct. You cannot just install something and run everything at defaults. All of the inverters that are on the market are quite programmable. You have to program essentially the settings that are provided to you by the battery manufacturer and the inverter manufacturer, because it's not just battery. You also have to comply to NRS spec and AC settings, your load parameters, etc. So there's a lot of settings that you need to basically know, and that is where that knowledge and experience comes from. And I want to encourage the people that are new to the industry to really just keep at it. Really get experience, even if you have to sacrifice getting paid for a weekend job, go get experience, because no one can take that experience away from you. And that will also differentiate you later, how much you know and across how many sectors.
There is one thing that you used, one of those weird words or terms that I'm not sure everybody is familiar with, and I was hoping that you could give the audience just a bit of an explanation. You mentioned the word arbitrage.
That's correct.
What is arbitrage? Can you explain it briefly? And what is it?
Correct. So arbitrage essentially is can we say the freedom to manage your financial risk. So this really speaks to smarter grids, more the international setting, but eventually we will also get to that, especially on the mini grid side. So you can decide when you want to have a certain pricing. So if you have a lot of generation in the grid, you'll see a lot of utility prices, or even for our case in the summer, you'll have a different pricing schedule than you will have in winter. So when the pricing is down, people don't necessarily want to sell the energy. So your consumption also is always disproportional to that. So when the pricing is high, then the consumption will be high also. So arbitrage means that you can take the generated energy, put it into storage, and then use it when the price is down, more favorable. So with storage, you basically have options of playing around of when that sweet spot is, when you want to use your energy. And all of this has got a lot of impact on pricing for industry. So this really speaks more to your larger scale projects and having a smart grid that will enable you together with storage to do that.
That is an excellent explanation. Thank you very much. So Jacques Pierre had a question about mini grids. So with arbitrage, you essentially, if you manage a mini grid properly, you would be able to use one large battery and play around with your tariffs to give the guys within the mini grid the best possible rate, depending on when they need the power. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I see you asked about the legality of it also. The legal aspect of it really depends on where you are. It depends on your local municipality. It depends on who is connected to it. And if your mini grid is off grid, you essentially have to conform to safety standards, and that is it. But that essentially is that principle. You can have a big battery, but you can also have a decentralized smart battery. So it all depends on the technology. So you'll see a lot of the industry and internationally, but I think what is happening in Africa is a decentralization of the generation of electricity as well as the consumption of it. And there's also added redundancy in that. There's extra basically fallback, where everything is not in one place, and if that one place goes down, then everyone suffers. If you have that spread over a lot of different nodes, you can essentially have options of either one falls over, the rest still carries on. And that, I think, is where the technology is going to differentiate itself going forward.
Yeah, that is interesting. I do see the storage systems and the inquiries on storage batteries being or becoming larger. So I do see a lot more inquiries. A couple of years ago, I would get an email with a guy asking for a 1 megawatt-hour battery.
Yeah.
And I would think that is ridiculous. And it's actually getting to the point where it's becoming a regular question, because guys are looking at installing bigger batteries, because the bigger your battery, the cheaper the cost per kilowatt hour. Is that assumption more or less correct?
That is exactly it. So with COVID, we have seen that price trajectory coming down slower, but it's still carrying on. So it's almost like a good wine. It just gets better and better with time, the pricing. So we're hopeful that I mean, we already will see that pivot point already compared to our local utility costs. But after that, at scale, you essentially can play with storage at any variance. And it really enables people to decide where they want to get their energy from.
Wow. Okay, Jacques, that was excellent. Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions.
Carel?
Yes, Linda?
Please, can you promote Duncan Abel to panelist? I'm not sure why it won't allow me to do that again.
I can try. I think I'm going to, yeah, okay. I can try do that quickly. We have got our next section coming up. Jacques, thank you very much for your presentation. It was a very interesting set of information. Francois says, please explain decentralized energy. Is that a question that you want to answer, Jacques?
Yeah, I'll do it quickly. Decentralized just means that you either sourcing or generating your energy from more than one source. So you can have multiple rooftops and multiple storages, let's say in a small community, and all of that is essentially forming a smart grid. People are also talking about virtual power plants. So as this technology is growing further, the more cleverer this is, we can make sure that we can break it into smaller sections and having redundancy. If one house goes down, we essentially can still have the rest of them generating and consuming, but it's getting to a point also in the smart grid where, let's say I've got my family over and you are on holiday and you are generating energy, I can actually then take some of your energy and use it because my consumption is higher. And you can also apply this to industry. If you have mines, a different sector in the mine is actually consuming more than the others, and offset that and having a real redundancy at play. And that is essentially what it's talking to. Not just one big place, one big pipe of energy coming through for consumption and generation.
So we could almost say that when we talk about a mini grid where each house has a battery and an inverter, and those all communicate intelligently within one another, within the group or the hub, that would be an example of a decentralized power supply or decentralized energy supply.
That's very correct, yes. And especially in our setting where a lot of municipalities and areas don't allow feedback or excess feedback from PV generation, that will actually speak to those efficiencies, because if I'm generating and my storage is full, I can then generate back into the rest of that mini group, and someone else can essentially down the line make use of that generation. So it's a lot more efficient.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for your input. The next section that's coming up is a section that's going to cover risks for solar business. The method or the reasoning behind having this section in the presentation was because we've got a lot of guys in industry that are busy importing stock out of China or from wherever because they've got a bit of funding available and they want to start getting involved in the solar sector, and they assume that distributors are making too much money. So they start becoming involved in the solar sector, they import a lot of stock, and then all of a sudden, overnight, you have something happening where the grid stabilizes. The contractor who imported all the equipment all of a sudden can't get rid of the stock, and the business goes under. And with us in this discussion, I've got Nick Roche from Rubicon and Thomas from Aarden Solar. Nick, are you? I can see you're in the panel. Are you available? Yes, your microphone's going on.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, let me just.
Can you hear me, Carel?
Yes, okay. I can hear you, and I can see you very well, and I can see Thomas in the other screen as well.
Cool.
I think I just want to put Thomas in the pin as well. At pin. Okay. Okay. Maybe Nick, we should start with you. If you could give us a short introduction of who you are and who you represent and what you guys do, that'd be great.
Certainly. I always fight with Zoom when I need to share my screen, so just give me a moment, and hopefully it behaves. With that.
While we are waiting for Nick to sort out his presentation, you guys would be glad to know that we are back on schedule as far as the timing is concerned. So thanks for that, Nick. You're good to go.
Good. Okay, thanks, guys. So my name is Nick Roach. I'm the CPO at Rubicon. I'm based in Cape Town, where our head office now resides. Just wanted to spend a few minutes, just 4 slides quickly, just to show you 1 or 2 things about what we do that relates to this conversation. It's a big topic, and it's a contentious topic, but I think it's good to give some insight into where we're adding value and how we're adding value. So we need to make sure that we're not just positioning ourselves in a supply chain of box shifters. And as the industry grows, that becomes more and more clear that there's more and more of that going on. And that creates a lot of risk for everybody. And so I'll show you some of the things that we're doing to add value to our customer and also mitigate the obvious risks. So as we offer services to our customers as part of our offering. So yes, we have a good product offering. The services that we add on top of that, we have an energy analytics division, which is a service we offer to our customers. It's not an EPC division or anything like that. It's energy analytics to enable our customers, let's say, sales journey. And we do a lot of it, and it's enormously successful. We've got 5 national warehouses. So the point of that is that we've got regional stock in all the locations. Very important part that we'll talk about in a moment is service, training programs and support. We'll talk about all of those. We also do product R&D and product evaluation. Compliance is a very big part of what we do in the supply chain. As you know, our industry in that regard has got some holes in it, I think is fair to say. And we put a lot of time and effort into making sure that the rules and regulations that are there are followed, and where there are no rules and regulations, that we follow next best practice. And that could be in the form of a European normal standard. It could be a couple of things depending on what we're talking about. And then to bolster those services, we are also releasing some big new tools. There's a bit of a big reveal coming up, so I won't say any more, but it's very important for us to make sure that we're adding more than just box shifting. And we really don't feel that we do that. So the next thing that I mentioned, I just wanted to spend a moment talking about is training. You know, in the value chain, let's say, One of our responsibilities is to train our customers both on our equipment, but also in technical skills, latest best practice, those kinds of things. So we work quite a bit with Carel, with PQRS in his training. We've done a lot of sessions with them, sort of on a one level up, and then on one level down in terms of the product. We invest quite heavily in training videos. Last year we produced about 35 training videos, and this year we will produce more to bolster that. And that's everything from installation, commissioning, all that kind of stuff. We have a YouTube channel which has a little bit on there, but we're in the process of fleshing that out. In terms of support, I think that's a very big part of what we do and where we fit into the value chain. We invest around 3 million Rand a year in support. So that's service and support and systems, the direct cost. There's also quite a bit of indirect cost as well. I mean, but it's certainly in that region, perhaps a little bit more. We have 7 dedicated support people. So these are not, sales people who occasionally answer a technical call. This is dedicated guys. They're all qualified, either electricians or some or other relevant electrical qualification, engineering qualification. We have 2 dedicated repair technicians. So that means that what we sell, we can service where it's our responsibility. In some cases, it's not our responsibility, but in many cases it is. So these are qualified electronics guys, very good, some of the best in the country. We have 2 dedicated service and support admins. So one of the things that you start to see is, there's a lot of admin around this, making sure that customers get all of the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and managing shipments of goods up and down, all those kind of things. So we have 2 guys who do that. And we're investing in new tools to facilitate the customer's support requirements, partially related to what I was talking about just now, but also we have some standard back-end tools that enable us to manage tickets and that kind of stuff. So we have a ticket portal that's managed by the admin guys. Then the other important part of what we do is R&D and product testing. So we do quite a bit of R&D. We have some of our own products. We also have, we also invest heavily in testing of other people's products that we are looking at selling. So let's just say, I don't know, we get solicited and unsolicited offers pretty much every day from new suppliers. And we have learned that we have some big battle scars from this. We know how easy it is and how exciting it is to release something that looks the latest and greatest, but when we get to site, it doesn't quite do what the box said it should. In most cases, it's just clunky and not finished, but in some cases, it can also be dangerous. So we've spent a lot of time testing and so on, and I'll talk about that in a moment, a bit more. And then we also do internal R&D. So we've got, as I said, some nice projects in the pipeline. So the point is that this is adding value to the value chain. It's not just in the front door and out the back door. Just wanted to give you, I've edited and redacted this table just to protect the names of the innocent. But I promise you that they're all legitimate. They're not just things I've made up. Different products that we've tested in the last couple of months, and you can sort of see that there's a relatively higher failure rate of those products, whatever the reason might be. There might be commercial reasons, there might be technical reasons, there might be any number of different things, could be quality reasons. And so we make sure that what we are selling has been tested, and it's not just about the product itself, it's also integration testing. So if you, let's say, the latest lithium-ion battery is, iGen and those guys is a great example of that, making sure that when that product is released into the market, it's compatible with the people that we need it to be compatible with. And we've been caught in a situation previously where we found a really great looking battery, and the supplier said, yep, absolutely no compatible with A, B, C, D, and E. And then when there was a problem, A, B, C, D, and E all said, no, nothing to do with us. We never approved it. Sorry, it's on you. And so there's a difference between something theoretically being compatible and actually being compatible, and agreed by all parties in writing. So we do quite a bit of that kind of thing. So you'll see this UPS failed. So certain things we launched, some stuff you can see there's quite a few just generally poor products that just don't make the grade, and we can't put them into the market. It could also be a compliance thing, that might be that these guys produce something, but they don't have NRS 097 as an example, if it's a grid tie inverter, or they may not be able to achieve, they may not be able to pass tests in order to get through the NRCS for the compulsory certification that's relevant to it. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you. That's my story.
Excellent, Nick. Thank you very much. I think what I got out of it was the backup and the additional service that you as a distributor offer that guys that just import at a whim might not necessarily be able to offer their customers. Something that struck me as being interesting was that there were only 2 service technicians. But then I thought, well, if you don't have a lot of failures, then 3 might be too many.
Yeah, look, that's just for direct repairs. For our direct repairs, we're only responsible for the repairs of a small slice of our basket. So if we sell Goodby, for example, they take responsibility for the actual repairs. But you can see that we have a lot more support guys, and that's because we support everything we sell.
That is excellent. I don't want you to go away. I just want to give Thomas an opportunity to quickly introduce himself and give us a bit more feedback about his business.
Thanks, Carel. Hi, everyone. I think from my perspective, I'll talk a bit about the journey going from a very small supplier in one single garage to now a couple of warehouses and whatnot. And the risks involved, as Carel and Nick spoke about, why you should deal with guys that are larger, why they take the risk, what the risks do you take, the experiences, the pitfalls that I've experienced myself. So I've gone from a very small company, not too large a company, but enough that we import our own things. We've lost quite a bit of money. We've made a lot of mistakes. I think when it comes to why you should select the larger guys and trust their feedback is because they've been through the washing machine. We've imported the wrong batteries that, as he alluded to, they claim it works. And when it comes back to it, it doesn't really actually work as it should. We've had quite a few of those come in from China. And also, a lot of the things that people don't take into consideration is that the markets become so competitive, your margins are extremely low. So you take risk in terms of returns. If your margin is very low, you can't risk a lot of returns. Also, another thing is just failure in terms of calculating for exchange rate. Installer failures, having the correct advice for people. There's a lot of things that people don't take in consideration when they start out this journey. They think suppliers make a lot of money. They supply to a lot of guys. We make a very small margin. So it's on a risk perspective, we take quite a few knocks on the chin that the installers don't know of. We take returns when we shouldn't have, because installers lack the education, or they lack the understanding to understand why this return happened, or why they failed and caused this return. So it's a major issue around education, which is a major risk. I've seen a lot of guys come into the industry since 2015 when I started. A lot of big corporates have come in, they failed. They don't have the proper sales channels. They don't understand the installers. And it always seems like they don't have a sense of direction or purpose in the industry. If you only come into the industry to make money and that's your only single perspective, I believe you're going to fail. If you add value, such as Rubicon, Aarden, PQRS, all these people that are contributing on this lovely webinar, then I believe you will succeed, because you need to come from a ungreedy perspective where you share knowledge, where you promote the industry, and that will grow everyone. It will improve your returns, it will improve your, how can I put it, your margins by having proper backup and support. Having proper regulation also improves margins, if we want to go there. The reason why it improves margin, it specializes the people, so it becomes more, there's a higher barrier to entry to the market. So I think for us, it's a very difficult thing to give people the right advice entering into the market, especially from a wholesaler perspective. Margins are very low. There's a lot of cheap batteries and wrong products out there. Yeah, sorry guys, I didn't really prep enough.
Thomas, I think what I would like to, something that I picked up from you that was interesting and that I would like to just quickly cover again is it's good for guys to start out and import their own stuff, but if you listen to what you've said, the risk, you've got to ask yourself the question whether the risk is really worth it. Because if you listen to a couple of comments that you've made on stuff that you've imported that has either not worked, or stuff that you've imported that didn't work as it was supposed to, those are the types of risks that guys that want to import stock end up carrying, and if they can't carry the weight of the risk from a financial point of view, you end up closing down. So you start up and you import product A, and tomorrow you've closed down. Someone else imports product B. So we end up in South Africa with a whole lot of stock that is not supported. You are, as far as I'm concerned, one of the success stories of the guys that started out in their garage, and you've managed to stay committed, and you've actually managed to build a business around that. So I see one of the questions coming in from Jacques Pierre is, how do distributors differentiate pricing to ensure that the installers get the benefit and not the end user? Do you have any comment on that?
Well, normally you would just try and check out your client. Do the application, have they got a VAT registered company? And if you go check out the company, you know, is it active in the solar industry? Have they placed adverts on their Facebook group? You know, is there some sort of track record? We do get a huge amount of guys now. What I've seen, especially on the commercial side, is a lot of end user clients are now starting to procure on their own. So it's very difficult sometimes to deal with it, to be quite honest, especially on the commercial side, because the clients do see quite a lot of margin sometimes on the EPC side, or they feel like they can also procure the products themselves. It's not necessary for the EPC to do it. There's advantages and disadvantages for the clients. But yeah, it's a difficult conundrum to get it right. For instance, we have a case now where we are quoting directly against the panel supplier to an end user, and the EPCs and everyone now has to compete with a panel supplier. You know, so it's a very difficult industry, and it's also size based, because it's a very large amount of panels that the client wants to procure. Then obviously it's very attractive. Then the panel suppliers and everyone will try their utmost to secure that revenue. So it becomes extremely cutthroat. It becomes a very low margin game, and very risky. Very risky. If you lose a lot of money.
I think the risk associated to importing stock are often, the risks are often overlooked. And I've got a question that I want to pose to Nick quickly, specifically around the volume of imports. And if you look at what Thomas has just said. He spoke about this one customer wanting to procure a large volume of stock. Nick, something that the guys often overlook would be warehousing. I mean, it's easy to think, wow, I'm going to save a lot of money because I've got a storeroom and I'm going to bring in a megawatt of panels, but the warehousing is not that straightforward, because you can only stack the panels that high, and something that I think the value that larger pairing up or teaming up with larger distributors can offer is not only on the risk but also on the warehousing. What do you guys do as far as warehousing is concerned? How do you deal with stock?
Yeah, that's really true. We have probably in the region of 20,000 square meters of warehousing around the country. And it's a big cost. It's also, it's a lot to manage, right? It's a lot of staff, it's a lot of equipment and machinery. You know, we're running many forklifts and all this kind of stuff. And there is a risk associated with that for sure. I mean, I'll give you an example. You know, during the rioting, we had to assess what our position was, because the financial risk is material, you know. And at one point we thought we were at risk, and the financial risk at that point in time to that warehouse was in excess of 60 million rand. So there's massive amounts of back-end infrastructure that needs to go in. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier is the level of insurance that we carry is enormous, not just on the goods themselves while we own them, but they're also insured while we possess them, even if we don't own them. So for example, we've sold them, but we're warehousing them for our customer, we carry that cost, and it's covered. The other insurance that we cover, just on the topic, is for faulty goods. So we have a massive insurance on a faulty goods insurance, which you don't get if you just go and get a who knows what brand Chinese battery with their made up BMS that catches fire after a week, you know.
Something that I see is a very hot topic, and I don't know if it's because of the posts over social media over the last couple of days. Is Thomas indicated that they take a couple of steps to try and understand who the guys are that are buying from them. How do you guys mitigate, or how do you evaluate pricing from an installer compared to an end user?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the guys commented, Jacques mentioned that, and it's a good point, and it comes up a lot. We get criticized for it occasionally, and I think people misunderstand how that works. The first thing to say is we have a price tiering system which is formalized, and we are a B2B company. We're not a B2C company, so we don't engage in Mrs. Jones other than on an informational level. So you'll know that we're doing a lot of end user marketing at the moment with the Model X and all that kind of stuff, but that's only to stimulate the market. That's all it is. It's not about Mrs. Jones buying EV chargers from us or whatever. We're adopting a bring it and they will come kind of approach to this. We believe that stimulating the market is good for everybody on this call, and everybody on this call will benefit from more awareness and that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, we're a B2B business, which means that we never intentionally trade with Mrs. Jones. But it does happen, and I'll tell you how it happens. Guys approach us from ABC Incorporated with a letterhead and whatever, and they say, no, we're new in the solar industry and we're doing this, that, the other. And everybody has their first day in the solar industry. And then only after 6 months do we realize that he was the MD of that company and he just wanted a cheap solar system. So we do our best to root that out. We really do, but it does occasionally slip through the door. The way, exactly as Jacques mentioned, is the relationship business, and it's one of the things that we work on intensively, is making sure that we have relationships with our customers, because it does two things. It sorts out a lot of this nonsense, but it also enables us to understand our customers, and it also reduces our risk in dealing with those customers, because we know who they are, what they're doing, you know, what is their profile in the industry.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's excellent. Thanks. I think one of the things I got from Thomas, maybe right at the start, it might have been a bit closer towards the beginning of when his business started, was relationship management. I think Thomas struck me as the kind of guy that was extremely good at managing relationships, and you've directly mentioned, Nick, that it has to do with the relationship. So I think if as an installer, I want to buy from either Aarden Solar or Rubicon, it's in my best interest to not just send you an email, but to, instead of just sending an email, set up a call, have a discussion to explain who I am, what I'm busy with, and where my business is going, because that will give the distributor the opportunity to evaluate me as a customer. And it will ensure that you get the right pricing for the type of customer that you are. What I have noticed is often you find that guys over a period of time will have a reduction in their pricing because the distributor can see that this guy is buying from them on a regular basis.
Yes.
I see. Yes, Thomas.
Can I make a quick point here? And I'm just checking here on the chat and some of the Q&A stuff going on here, Carel.
Okay.
And I think sort of what John Silver remarks here with the online sites pushing down the margins, and then sort of the question about the Unistrats flow together. So yeah. I know a lot of installers use the Unistrat, I don't know, P1000, P2000, something like that, to do mounting structure because it's the cheapest and easiest way to do it. So for instance, we don't even sell the P2000, P1000, whatever it is, because that's just pushing the margins down in the industry again, because it's cheaper. But yes. I feel the reason that's allowed to happen again is the lack of regulation. Because the more regulation you have, the more expensive your equipment, the more regulated your equipment that goes in has to be. And also the more your installers are going to get paid for their specific skill. Yes. So I think a lot of the problems with margin and installer devaluing will sort of go away as we get more regulations in the industry. And also your unskilled, unsuitable guys will start falling out because the expense of keeping up, the new qualifications, the new equipment will flush them out of the system. I don't know if you share that.
I don't see the rate at which, the rate at which new guys are coming in. I don't see. If you look at organizations like the Electrical Contractors Association, so the ECA and the ECB, those organizations date back to the 1950s, and their mission or their goal was to ensure that the standards are upheld. We are now 70 years down the line, and it still hasn't happened because of the disparity in industry. Each guy is fighting in his own corner, and up until the point where we reach the position where we start working together as an industry, there's no ways that we're going to be able to cement the standards. Nick, looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, you've raised a super important point. One of the things that the industry needs to recognize, people spend a lot of time pointing fingers at each other. You sell to the wrong people, you deal with the wrong people, you don't, One of the things that the industry needs to realize is that the value chain is a value chain for a reason. There's value throughout the chain. And to your point, Carel, having good quality, qualified installers and equally EPCs is super critical in this business. And anybody in the industry who thinks that it's a great idea to just supply directly to anybody and they don't see that value doesn't understand the industry, in my opinion. There's value throughout the chain. So there's value in the import and distribution. There's value in the engineering, without a doubt. That came up earlier as well. The engineering is so important, I think in the first presentation. And equally and separately, the value in installation. So engineering separate from the installation, super important, or construction. And finally, I think probably the most ignored or not yet established part of our industry is the O&M part of our industry. I think it's equally an important part of our industry. And if we don't include that in the value chain discussion, it creates a bad taste or a bad impression out in the market, because after 2 years, half the systems are broken and not reporting and not working. And the perception from the point of view of the people who are buying them is that the stuff lasts very little time. In Kenya, that is the perception, for example, because there was a lot of rubbish flown in there 5-10 years ago. And in general, solar is not well received in Kenya, on the ground, let's say. Now, of course, there's a professional industry there, but we saw that in some of the surveying that we did about 2 years ago. We went and did some work there, and the answer that we got from so many people was solar is just a lot of rubbish. So all of those pieces of the value chain are so critical, so critical, and nobody can deny it.
Nick, thank you very much for your input. We are past our time, 2 minutes past. I want to give Thomas, I don't know whether you have a last comment before we close the session. I think the bottom line was to give a bit of an overview to participants to understand the risks associated with importing your own stuff, understanding that there's a value chain and that there is a purpose for distributors for having a margin, for carrying the risk and providing additional services. Thomas, you want to quickly just wrap it up?
Yeah, I believe there is a trend in industry where sort of margins is consolidating a little bit, or the way that people are realizing they can't just cut each other's throats off with battery supply to a reseller, to an installer, to a end user. So I think there is, from the mid-size to the larger suppliers and wholesalers, there is some form of, we're trying to force the market a little bit into form so that everyone gets a nice margin, acceptable margin. I think every business should get at least a 20% margin. That's a fair one for everyone. If everyone can get that, it's a whole different question. It's whether the market allows it. But yeah, I think if we can keep the companies in shape and from our side, just commit to try and keep the structure, try and keep the structure of the business. Installers don't try and undercut resellers and all this nonsense.
Yes.
If everyone plays by the rules, then yeah, it can be nice and profitable for everyone, but no one ever plays by the rules. So it happens.
Thomas and Nick, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. Guys, we don't have time for any more questions. I'm going to move over to Shaun. Shaun is going to deal with the finances topic. And I look forward to getting a bit of input and feedback from the guys in industry providing financing. Shaun, I have seen you in here. Are you ready?
Here you go.
I'm just trying to see where your video feed is.
Can you find me?
I'm sure you must be in here somewhere.
I am indeed. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay. Oh, there you are. Oh, you did manage the view with the mountains, did you?
Of course, we have to.
Okay, excellent. So the wind's not too bad. Okay.
Perfect.
Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, and then I don't know what your plan is, whether you're going to give each panelist a quick 2 minutes to introduce themselves. The floor is yours. You're welcome to run it as you like.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Good morning, Sambonani, Dumela, who's it, everybody? So yeah, I'm Shaun Slover. I'm from I'll be the panel chair. I got to get asked all the very difficult questions today. So the guys, brace yourselves. But effectively, I'm from a company called New Home. We offer decentralized energy with no capital to consumers, but it's effectively, let's call it energy as a service kind of business. I think the reason why I'm on the panel and kind of like the chair today is effectively, I come from a background, I'm a quantity surveyor by trade, and I had to go through some very hard yards. Basically, no insight or understanding of how finance is structured within the renewable space. And I had to go through a bit of a baptism fire, steep learning curves, jargon nobody bloody well understands. We know this, and like it still leaves me sometimes scratching my head looking at some of the smart guys. But luckily today we have all the smart guys in one room together, and they can demystify what's going on in this industry. But I think, you know, the big fat elephant always in the room is how are we going to pay for all of this renewable energy kind of like things that's happening in our industry? And I think that's a big question. But before I start grilling everybody, I'm going to introduce everyone. First up, we have Deerosh Maharaj from Standard Bank. Deerosh, take 2 minutes, introduce yourself to everybody, please.
Thank you, Shaun, and thank you to the organizers for including us in this. It's certainly been a very insightful session. So I work for Standard Bank, and I'm the senior manager for in natural resources, and I take care of the power and sustainable solutions subsectors. So that's where I fit in. Thank you.
Perfect. Secondly, we have Guy Rice from CANDI Solar. Guy, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm the MD of CANDI Solar. CANDI Solar provides, specializes in providing PPAs and finance, variety of finance packages for solar PV. We're a Swiss-based company with independent Swiss-based funding lines, and we're a company of 58 people globally. So we're not a small company. And we were talking about female contingent earlier. 47% of the South African staff, which are 15, are female.
Good stuff. Last but not least, we got Duncan Abel from Nedbank. Duncan, quick intro for yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun, and thanks for the invite. So my name is Duncan Abel. I sit within the energy finance team in our investment bank, primarily looking at corporate and investment sort of funding in the renewable space on the back of power purchase agreements. But just to add on to that, I mean, there are a number of different touch points within the bank, all the way from our home loans business unit, sort of looking at funding sort of residential sort of systems through our business banking, and then up to myself in the investment banking, both on balance sheet, off balance sheet structures. I mean, I won't go into sort of the detail around that, but sort of, yeah, leave it to sort of the panel and the questions, and then we can go through it like that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, gentlemen, obviously, let's dive into the difficult questions. Duncan, I'm going to kick off with you. So, in your opinion, big banks, private funders, on a high level, what do you think they are currently doing, and kind of like what is the industry kind of pushing to really kind of like get out to the consumers, get out to the EPC contractors, most of them obviously on this call. What are you guys doing to unlock this industry for us?
So trying to sort of develop products that are suited to what the market needs at the time. I mean, as I said earlier, we go all the way from sort of in the residential sort of sector, and there at the moment it's really just an extension of your home loan, rather than having a product specific or a sort of renewable specific offering. And the reason for that is that the demand hasn't been there. And then as we sort of moved up the curve, and we've got various different sort of asset-backed sort of funding solutions, term solutions, off balance sheet, or your limited recourse solutions, and so, I mean, our role in the different areas within the bank is to try and develop solutions which sort of meet the market expectations, but then also at the same time assess the various different risk factors that are inherent in both in lending and inherent in the sort of the product set, so sort of renewable energy, and then to try and marry those two. I mean, the big push at the moment is obviously the changes to Schedule 2, and what this does with regards to larger projects in the private sector, also what it does with regards to wheeling. And again, as a bank, having to try and adapt to that. But also, I mean, sort of need to add, I mean, the banks aren't, we aren't the only funders in this space. And we typically, I mean, as has always been sort of said, I mean, banks are generally quite conservative. There is an opportunity for other funders in the space to, at times, sort of unlock opportunities, sort of be the first movers to start for sort of funding. I mean, we typically get involved and we bring scale to the opportunity once the opportunity has settled down a little bit. So battery sort of case in point. I mean, your banks wouldn't be the first funders of batteries in South Africa. It would typically be somebody sort of equity funding batteries, and then you'd find other funds or other private sort of impact investors or sort of angel investors looking at a higher risk profile and looking to invest into those. Only once it's been, I suppose, sort of de-risked to an extent do the banks come in, and the advantage of the banks is, as I say, we bring scale. We start bringing in sort of billions of rands worth of funding and really unlocking the market.
So that's obviously a very good point, and I think that kind of like pivots quite nicely into Deerosh's hands, because I know they've been working with a little secret project that it's not kind of like widely pushed at the moment, or maybe it is. But Deerosh, obviously there's rumors in the market of like a very consumer-focused products that you guys are developing. It's called Power Pulse. I mean, obviously this is very much like Standard Bank kind of baby. For the renewable energy sector. Can you tell us a little bit more what's going on there? What are you guys cooking up?
Yeah, so happy to share some of the Power Pulse journey with you guys. And I think Duncan and Guy will bear me out on this, but the funding side of it is actually the simple side, for the bank. And it was a journey for us as well to get to the point where we understand the products and the solutions that are needed. But as a bank, we've observed, particularly in the C&I space, particularly in the SSEG and smaller installations, that the industry is very fragmented. And when clients try to procure a solution, from our run rate, the number of solution providers that reach out to us and the number that we get comfortable with, we would say 5% of solution providers are actually credible and know what they, that we would actually feel comfortable placing our clients in their hands, So from that perspective, as we started to grow and our growth, obviously, you have to have the correct funding solutions. And with the introduction of that, we started to grow in tandem with the market. The market's growing at a rapid pace. It's a very much a gold rush environment at this point in time. And because of that fragmentation and the challenges we've seen and, the school fees that clients have paid, from not really taking into account the things that we weren't even aware of at some stage. We've introduced a platform now that basically guides that process, and it allows the client to come into a credible marketplace. We provide them with insights up front, provide them with knowledge. There's a learning moment, very early on with information they have at their fingertips. It takes them through the process and introduces them to credible EPCs that we've pre-vetted, pre-accredited. And if there's a funding solution, the funding's there. So that's pretty much what Power Pulse is about. We've gone live. It's only available to Standbank clients in the beta testing phase at this point in time. So it's very much by invite only. And we soon, maybe early next year, we'll go live to market. But the reality is that we are already thinking of pivoting towards residential, and we should launch a proof of concept in the coming days. So that's, I hope I've encapsulated it well enough. That's what Power Pulse is about. Thank you.
I think I got to say, I think a lot of the guys on the webinar today would be very interested, because obviously there's a large chunk that serves the residential market. We always joke talking about that cupcake kind of scenario. There's going to be so many big mega projects and then some icing projects. Let's call that the C&I kind of space. But there's this residential kind of like the cake, the real meat of the business, that is really unserved. And I think Power Pulse is going to play quite a nice critical role in that space. But then obviously I'm going to roll over to Guy and kind of say, Guy, obviously we have SMEs across the country form the backbone of our economy, right? So what has CANDI done to kind of like unlock and help some of these EPCs who's usually at the sharp end, kind of at conversation with clients? How do they help business owners, etc., to get actually solar on their roof, Guy? I mean, from a CANDI perspective, hop in here, tell us what you guys have done for the industry and kind of like how it works.
So I mean, CANDI stands for C&I. So we focus on the C&I environment. Typically, if you're not told that, you don't realize it and you wonder where the name CANDI comes from. Once you see it, you'll never unsee it. Our mandate when we were set up, I'll share on goes a bit to what Duncan was saying. Our mandate when we were set up was to actually almost be the bridge into markets, with the view to proving markets were commercially viable, with the view to unlocking value, and then to be almost like a torchlight to the big bold players to move in behind us. That's originally the concept behind CANDI. And as I say, we've got some major multinational, big thinking shareholders behind us. And that was their thinking. They're involved in the electrical game, what have you. So EPCs, in terms of, they effectively, what we do is we work with the EPCs in terms of going to market. We're not an EPC ourselves. We are a specialist finance / engineering company, and indeed half of our staff are engineers. And we will bring best practice in terms of ensuring the end user gets a finance solution. So what happens is an EPC will bring us a transaction, and they will have possibly 5 or 10 points in terms of doing a model for the customer. We're able to turn a solar proposal over between 3 and 5 days, and put a business case in front of the customer. We specialize in working with the customer in terms of understanding their requirements from a financial perspective, because it's important to understand solar is a financial product. When you get to gensets and battery energy storage, it's a business continuity product as opposed to solar, which is a financial product. So we're able to present the customer with a financial product for solar and take the risk out of solar for the customer. So it's like we carry the risk as the turnkey provider from A to Z. And when I say A to Z, it's from design right through to the end of the term of the transaction, which could be up to 20 years. So we de-risk the entire solution for the customer. We look at the design, we look at the yields, we look at what needs to, we look at the equipment that's going in, we look at what the customer's profile is, what the customer's looking from a financial perspective, their cash flows and what have you. So we will look to unlock the value that solar brings for that particular customer on a bespoke basis.
Okay, that's excellent. So, and obviously, I mean, like, you know, none of us on this call, other than you lot, are real kind of like the financial gurus to a large extent. So Duncan, I mean, like, keeping it simple, and for a lack of a better word, let's say, you know, keeping it in simple terms. You know, I'm talking to my client. I've got to take the contractor EPC guys out there. I've got to take my client to you guys. What is expected of us to kind of like arrive at your door with, and kind of like, where is that door? Because sometimes that's a difficult thing to kind of figure out. Where do I take my client to get him his system financed effectively, and what paperwork is required to come? Do I need to arrive there with? And obviously, there's different scenarios. So let's break it down and say, you know, and I'm going to talk about, like Joe so public, and I've got my house and I bank with Nedbank. What do I do? What do I need to arrive at your door to get my solar system financed through you guys?
So if we're talking in the residential space and you're talking about a Nedbank client, the easiest thing is there. I mean, assuming that the client has got a home loan, is just for them to approach their sort of relationship banker or their branch manager around their home loan, and to then sort of find out once you're in that space, once the bank is lending directly to you as a client, it's almost in a sort of a standard funding relationship. I mean, we're going to look at your client and their ability to repay that loan, and although we will take interest, and we will do some modeling around the solar system and the value that solar system will bring to their house and reduce sort of costs on their side. I mean, ultimately, we're looking at their ability to repay that loan, their financial sort of standing. Easiest thing is they've got headroom in that home loan. If that's the case, then it's really just re-advancing that headroom. And there's nothing more. There's nothing more sort of sinister around it. I mean, the problem is, and you alluded to it earlier, is often we get approached by people who don't quite understand what they're asking for from a financing point of view, and then through no fault of their own. I mean, we've got, as I sort of said, we've got sort of probably 6 or 7 touch points within the bank, depending on what kind of customer you are and not what kind of solar system you're looking to finance. So as I said, from sort of the residential space through to our smaller commercial, sort of professional client space, to the property funding, to our normal sort of corporate or business bankers, and then to the likes of myself, where it's more sort of structured transactions, sort of your off-balance sheet transactions. I mean, if you walked into a branch, and I think it's probably the same for all the other banks as well, and you asked for a solar loan, your typical person in the branch is probably going to glaze over, and they're not going to be quite sure what it is that you're looking for. If you went in there and sort of said, I'm wanting to install a solar system on my house and looking for a re-advance on my home loan, it's a standard transaction. They know exactly what it is that you want. And so it's really around framing how that question gets asked and who you're approaching in the banks. The other thing that I often get asked is, or get approached by EPCs or developers who sort of say, I need to organize financing for my client. Please, can you tell me what financing terms you can provide to my client? In short, I can't do that. I mean, there's obviously sort of confidentiality agreements that we've got in place with the client as well. So as much as we understand that the EPCs and developers are really trying to assist their clients, the best thing that they can do is to understand who their client should be speaking to in the bank, and then pushing their client to that person or to that part of the bank and getting that conversation started. Because I can't engage with those EPCs around confidential financial information around our clients. As it currently stands, and Deerosh sort of mentioned it earlier, I think most of the banks also only deal, or especially when you're talking about sort of smaller systems, and definitely in the residential space, is we'll only provide funding to existing Nedbank clients. We're all looking at sort of broadening that. So it also makes the EPC's task a little bit more difficult, in that, again, they want to approach Duncan and they want to get a one-stop shop for all of the EPC's clients, but those EPCs are banked across all the various different banks. So again, it's, I mean, sort of first question is, who do you bank with? And then assist them in directing them to the right person within their own bank.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, so just sort of last point on that. It's almost a bit of a red flag as well. I mean, if someone from Standard Bank approached Nedbank for a loan for their solar system at home, and Standard Bank weren't able to provide them with that loan, it's a bit of a red flag for me, because Standard Bank's got that relationship. They should know that customer better. I shouldn't be able to provide a more competitive solution to a Standard Bank client. Let me leave it there.
Fair point, right? So I've been lucky enough to have some interactions, obviously, with Guy around some more on let's say the bigger clients that we've had as a business. So Guy, can you give us a bit of a rundown on the products that you guys are offering? Let's say the businesses out there, the SMEs of this world that actually really wants to go the renewable route.
Sure. So I think first of all, in terms of who they bank with, it doesn't really matter to us. We look at the solar system, and we only take security on that solar system. So we don't look for direct securities, special bonds or anything like that. We've got a wide range of products which are generally all performance linked. So what we mean by that is we are not a bank, in that we provide a service, and the service is we sell cheap electricity and recover all the back-end costs in terms of the amount of electricity we sell. So we're not charging an interest rate, and we're not providing a finance product in that sense. The benefit for the customer, though, is that they still obtain a solar system, which is typical of all finance products. We're able to provide a PPA, as people know, a power purchase agreement. We've got an installment credit agreement. We're able to do loans. We're able to do sale and lease back. And these, as I say, can all be linked to performance. So we will tie the repayment to the electricity that we deliver. The terms of the transactions typically range from 5 to 20 years, which I think some of the banks. I think most banks will go up to 10 years, just in general, though some might go longer. We can utilize the 12B structuring in terms of some of our products, which is a real huge plus for some customers, and certainly our principal product, which is the performance lease installment sale contract, we typically do look to use that. We can finance gensets, we can finance battery energy storage systems as well as the solar PV, which makes it interesting for the customers. We are looking for transactions outside of South Africa as well. So our mandate, what we've set up in South Africa for the last 2 years, and now we're looking to broaden our scope. Please don't bring us Zimbabwe at the moment. There's lots of interest in Zimbabwe. We're piloting one or two. We're piloting one or two there, and it's enough. But there's huge demand there. Everyone wants power. Typically, our lowest transaction size now is 1 million rand. We had to put a cap on it. We got smashed. Inquiries coming through. So just be able to cope with the volume, we put a cap at 1 million rand. The equipment we finance, we can finance any tier 1 equipment. We like Huawei, we like SMA, we like SolarEdge. But we don't prescribe it, and we don't get in the way of the EPCs and their suppliers. What they charge the customers, what they charge the customers, their margin, and we don't prescribe who they use and what have you. So we understand that the margin for EPCs is this big. So we try and give them what is on the table without cannibalizing it. We rely on EPCs for business. So at the moment, we don't go directly, so it's very difficult for us to refer work. Because we're not an EPC ourselves and we don't bill ourselves.
Correct. Okay. So I mean, like, I'm going to hop straight into Deerosh. I mean, like, obviously from a Standard Bank perspective, obviously you guys also play quite heavily in the commercial industrial space, and obviously opening the opening the doors to Africa. Standard Bank has always kind of been very pro. I spend a fair amount of my time in Nigeria, still love the country. It's definitely like my second home. But what are you guys doing to unlock that commercial industrial space in South Africa, but also onto the rest of the continent? But I think keep it in South Africa for the context of today's conversation.
No, certainly. So Shaun, from our perspective, the journey started with our clients, understanding what the needs were, and then understanding the solutions and how they actually feature. And in the C&I space, the funding solutions were critical. And, the funding solutions range, they present themselves in one of two ways. Either it's a CapEx funding solution for the client that they're doing, for their own use on their balance sheet, or it's a contract-backed lend where you have an asset manager or you have a developer that's developing a portfolio of assets where they're backed by PPAs or, some form of contractual obligation between the off-taker and, the owner of the asset. So we are able to solution for all of those, across that spectrum. And it's really about, enabling that environment. So when it comes to debt tenor, we guys quite right. Our comfort area is generally around 5 years. We can go up to 10 years when it comes to solar PV installations where there's merit. We have gone on utility scale projects far beyond that, but in the SSEG space, that's generally, sort of the parameters. I think that it really is not just about the funding though. It's really about, driving the right industry behaviors to ensure that, this becomes, what everyone has been speaking about for the past few hours. So that's really the bank's perspective on it.
Okay, perfect. I think we basically right on the limit of our time for a half-hour slot. Guy, Deerosh, Duncan, thank you very much for your time. We're going to wrap up. I'm going to ask Guy to give us a quick summary in his opinion. What is the difference between bank and private finance for solar? Because you can see there's definitely horses for courses. Certain clients have got existing relationships with banks, and they will tend to have that trusted. Other business would need a little bit more of a flexible solution, but I'm not going to give the answer. Guy, can you summarize for us?
Yeah, very quickly. Just before you go, sorry, sorry for interrupting you, Guy. I really apologize. Deerosh indicated earlier on that he has a timing issue and that he has to leave. So Deerosh, in respect of your diary, thank you very much for your time. If you've got to run, we will finish up with Guy. Guy, I do apologize for interrupting your presentation.
I'm sorry as well, Guy. Yeah, so thanks Carel, and thanks everyone. And this was certainly one of the better webinars I've attended. I found it very good, very insightful, and well done to everyone for all the work that's gone in. So thank you all. Cheers.
Thanks for your time, Deerosh. Well,
thanks, Deerosh.
Shaun, I'll attempt to be very quick because we are on time. Look, at the end of the day, I think it's about risk and price. So the biggest thing what we find in the market is that the banks have a much better, because they've got volume, they can offer a very low finance price. And they're actually doing a loan product. And doing a loan product, there's a whole element of risk that they're not taking on. So what we see in the market is when we offer a PPA or alternative finance, our price is inherently high, and that's because we've essentially got a full finance or full maintenance lease plus risk around the product. And customers need to understand what they want to take on as a risk. So if they want to take on the maintenance risk and the equipment risk and operational risk, then a bank finance is a better option because it's the cheaper option, because banks are able to, they understand the customer well, they're able to deploy money well. If the customer does not want to become an energy producer and manage the whole system and manage the equipment warranties and manage the maintenance, then they need to go for more like a full maintenance / PPA type product. I think that if you want to give it in a nutshell, that's the nutshell between the different types of finances.
Okay, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So yeah, Guy, thank you very much. I think it's been very insightful to understand that side of it. Duncan, thank you very much for your time. Hugely appreciate it. We do have a couple of questions on here. We also Jacques also shared with everybody that Eskom is asking us to please stop using electricity. You know, that one product that they're actually selling to all of us, which I find absolutely hilarious every time I look at it. It's the only company in the world that wants us to stop buying their product, and they actually urge and put marketing campaigns out for it, which I find rather funny. Some people don't, but anyway. I think one of the questions that I saw pop up here, and it was well, number one, they wanted Guy's details, but that's been sorted out, so don't stress. But I think, you know, just in closing, one of the questions that we had was, you know, from a bank perspective, and I think, Duncan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but, you know, like, and I'm not saying, you know, all banks are the same, but I think, you know, it's usually we find the same kind of products from one bank to the same, and it's all about, actually, for the banks, about the relationship that they have with their clients, and that's a big part of what they leverage. So somewhere in there is a question, I promise. So if you go through that process, I think, you know, do you guys take a different view on the relationship when it comes to kind of your clients and what you would finance for them? Because obviously, let's say for argument's sake, I want to put it on my home, the conversation that I need to have with you guys, what does that actually kind of clip into? And would I get something better if I go to the banks? You alluded to that earlier, and I think this is the last question, then we can step off that.
So yeah, I mean, automatically you're going to get, or you should get, a better offering from your own bank. For the simple reason is we've got a broader relationship with you, we understand you better, and we're also getting revenue or sort of fees or interest from other products, transactional products that you have in place. If you go and try and start a new relationship with a new bank, they don't have any of that. And there's also sort of an onboarding process. There's costs involved in getting you getting you on board. So that's the first sort of thing. Your first starting point with your existing bank. As far as the product set goes, for the most part, if we're lending directly to a client, those product sets are pretty much the same. Every bank is going to offer you a term loan. Every bank is going to offer you a home loan. The differences that come in potentially the term of that term loan. We'll go out in the sort of business banking sort of sector out to 10 years on a term loan in the sort of solar space. But it doesn't mean that everyone's going to get 10 years. Only your better clients are going to get 10 years. Others will probably get, I don't know, 3-5 years. But you're more likely to get that extended term with your own bank than rather going out to a new bank. So it's not necessarily the product sets that are different. Once we start getting into investment banking, then it is quite a bit different, because then it's more sort of structured, bespoke products which are done on a transactional basis, or the product is designed on a transactional basis, and you will get differences there. But in your sort of volume markets, in your residential space, in your small medium sort of enterprise space, those product sets are the same. The details behind those product sets can differ.
So, okay, perfect. So, and I think to wrap it all up for everybody is like, there's obviously a very niche place for everybody to play in. The banks have got their role to fulfill. Guy from CANDI Solar and his team and the private funding has got their role to fulfill. And I think it's a very good and healthy place to be. I think there's the fact that the banks are driving consumers and the CNI space with private funding like CANDI, etc., is becoming a very critical part of this industry and unlocking the true success of this industry. So I think the one key takeaway for all of us is the fact that the banks are thinking about it. Private sector is heavily driving it, business like CANDI. And I think that's the key thing that we want to take away from this. So yeah, I just want to take a moment. Duncan, thank you very much for your time. Hugely appreciate it. Guy, thank you very much for time. And in Deerosh's absence, thank you very much for his time. Hugely appreciate it. And I'm going to hand it straight back over to Carel. Back to you.
And thanks to you, Shaun. Thanks for setting us up.
Thanks, Carl. Cheers, Duncan.
Cheers, Guy.
Thank you very much, Shaun, and to all the other panelists. Guys, I would like to, we are at the allocated time, which is just past 1. So I'm glad we could make up the additional time. I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. We will circulate the contact details of the speakers. So if there are some of the speakers that don't want their contact details circulated, we will pass the information of the guys working under them, but you'll definitely get contact details of the guys who participated as speakers or presenters. We will upload the slides that were presented onto the association site, as well as a copy of the recording. We'd like to thank everybody for their participation. Apologies to those guys that asked questions that weren't answered, but you are going to be getting the contact details of the guys, so you would be able to get the answers, approach those guys directly and get the answers from them. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for participating, and we hope that you've enjoyed the session with us today. Thanks, guys. Keep well.